The sunshine and beaches of South Florida attract many types of people. Aspiring young models gravitate here with the hopes of being discovered. Beginning in February 1984, the dreams of stardom darkened into nightmares when several young women disappeared. It was the beginning of a string of brutal and terrifying murders that spread out across the country.
It's a model's job to rivet the public's attention. But in 1984, some aspiring models began attracting publicity in a terrible new way. Across the country, dreams of glamour turned nightmarish as young women disappeared, only to be found tortured and killed. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When a suspect emerged, the FBI's 10 most wanted list became the tool we used to try to flush him out.
The promising life of Beth Kenyon came to a violent end on March 5th, 1984. The attractive 23-year-old dreamed of becoming a model. She'd even been a finalist in the Miss Florida pageant. But all her hopes were cut short this Monday afternoon. The next day, Beth's parents reported her disappearance to the Miami police. The police merely listed Beth as a missing person and explained many girls her age drop out of sight for various reasons without telling their parents. But the Kenyons knew their daughter wasn't the type to just vanish after a few days on a lark. They hired private detective Ken Whitaker and his son Ken Jr. to investigate.
She's been missing.
The Kenyons told the Whitakers that Beth worked as a teacher of emotionally disturbed children.
She has a regular routine that she comes home.
She was responsible and enjoyed a close relationship with her family.
Strange there. This is, as you can see, where she had a 6 o'clock appointment. That she
Fearing something had happened to Beth, the Kenyons had searched their daughter's apartment in North Dade County for anything that might help them find her. But all they found was an address book and a picture album.
Beth, and this is Beth over here, and this is a boyfriend, somebody she went out with.
This is just showing me a picture.
Armed with little more than a few snapshots of Beth and her friends, the investigators went to work. The father and son team quickly narrowed down Beth Kenyon's last known whereabouts. Ken Whitaker Jr. talked to an attendant at a Miami gas station near the school where Beth taught. Ken showed the attendant several photographs. He clearly remembered Beth, but he also recognized someone else in the photos, a man that accompanied Beth the afternoon she disappeared. His name was Christopher Wilder. On March 11th, 6 days after Beth's disappearance, the investigators contacted Wilder by phone. He denied knowing where Beth was, but invited the Whitakers to his house to speak more about her. But when Wilder didn't answer his door, the suspicious investigators decided to look around. They had learned he was a successful building contractor and a self-proclaimed fashion photographer. The Kenyons had told the father and son team that Wilder had proposed to their daughter, but that she had turned him down, leaving him upset and angry. Rifling through the garbage, the Whitakers found a photograph.
Chris Wilder.
On the surface, it appeared an innocent picture, but to trained eyes, it meant more. The Investigators soon learned that Christopher Wilder had driven a car in the Miami Grand Prix. On February 26, 1984, he finished 17th and won $400. That race day was also the last time that anyone saw Rosario Gonzalez. The 20-year-old worked for a marketing firm distributing free aspirin samples at the Grand Prix. The Miami news still buzzed with the mysterious disappearance of Gonzalez. She had vanished just 5 days before Beth Kenyon. The investigators discovered that Wilder knew Gonzalez. She had modeled for him in amateur photo shoots. It was a critical connection. The two missing women, Beth Kenyon and Rosario Gonzalez, were linked through Christopher Wilder. With this information, Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon sought the help of the FBI. Special Agent John Hanlon of the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit in Miami remembers the meeting.
On the 12th of March, the Kenyons came to the FBI seeking more active involvement of the FBI. Of course, we didn't have any jurisdiction at the time. There was no evidence of an abduction.
In an attempt to put pressure on Wilder, the Kenyons' private investigators leaked their findings to the Miami Herald. The story was published on March 16, 1984. Though the article did not mention Christopher Wilder's name, it clearly accused him. The report described the man connecting Gonzalez and Kenyon as a local contractor, race car driver, amateur photographer, and a native Australian. It was Wilder to a T. Although the FBI had no jurisdiction, Supervisory Special Agent Gordon McNeil had already begun looking into the matter.
This connection drew my interest, and I decided to open a preliminary kidnapping investigation to see if we had a possible violation of federal law.
Agents McNeil and Hanlon found Wilder was a likely suspect. He had a criminal history that reached back to his native Australia, where he was out on bail on a sexual assault charge. Days later, on March 21st, the agents were notified about an incident which allowed them to open a full investigation. A phone call came into the Miami FBI office, reporting that a Tallahassee, Florida woman had been abducted and transported across state lines into Georgia, where she escaped. The initial description of her assailant fit Christopher Wilder.
Are you okay?
Special Agent Hanlon flew to Georgia to hear the victim's story. It was a nightmare.
Oh, sorry, no business.
19-year-old Linda Grober told Hanlon she'd been shopping in a mall in Tallahassee, Florida, when a man approached her about a modeling job.
Magazine covers? I got any number of them. And it really sounds like
Claiming to be a photographer, the stranger invited her back to his car to see his portfolio. It was the middle of the afternoon in a very public place, and Linda said she felt perfectly safe.
Never?
When he asked her if she'd ever modeled, she said no. He flattered her with remarks about how beautiful she was and promised he could put her on the cover of Vogue. But Linda reported that when they got to his car, the photographer began changing his story. He claimed he'd left his portfolio at his studio, and he asked Linda to go back to the studio with him. When she hesitated, the man attacked and pushed her into the car. He clubbed her on the back of her head. Everything just went black. When she regained consciousness, they were driving on a country road. When her abductor saw her coming around, he stopped the car in a secluded spot. He dragged Linda from the car, telling her that if she tried to escape, he would kill her. He wrapped his fingers around her throat and strangled her until she passed out. The next time she woke up, she was wrapped in a sleeping bag, lying on a bed in a cheap motel room. Once again, he threatened to kill her if she tried to escape.
Don't move.
He tied her to the bed and superglued her eyes shut. For the next several hours, the kidnapper repeatedly raped, beat, and tortured Linda Grober. When she disobeyed his commands, he shocked her with an extension cord he had fashioned into an electrocution device.
And he tied
The
me
abuse
up.
was so severe, Linda realized she would be dead before someone found her.
And then we drove her away.
She managed to break free and locked herself in the bathroom.
Somebody help! Help!
She pounded on the walls and screamed for help.
Help me!
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Hey! Stop now! Stop it! Stop it! I'm telling you!
The rapist panicked, grabbed what he could, and ran. Agent Hanlon showed Grober a series of photos and asked if she could identify her assailant.
It was absolutely no doubt in my mind. I mean, I'd spent hours with this person that's who he was. And I just identified him as clearly Christopher Wilder.
Now 35, a PhD candidate and a single mom, Linda Grober's fierce determination saved her life. It also made her a strong witness, ready to risk everything for her abuser's arrest.
I was in the hospital for a week or something like that, and then I had to basically leave the country while he was still a fugitive because they were concerned about my safety. They were concerned about my family's safety.
As heinous as Grober's ordeal was, it had the value of catapulting the investigation into a federal case. Because she had been abducted across a state line, the FBI now had full jurisdiction. Christopher Wilder was now wanted for the kidnapping and rape of Linda Grober. And he remained the prime suspect in the disappearance of Rosario Gonzalez and Beth Kenyon.
Obviously now we had federal violation, and we had every reason to put all the resources of the FBI into this case.
Not knowing exactly where to find Wilder, a team of agents descended upon his house in full force. Kicking in the door, they poured in, ready to arrest the suspect.
Clear! 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 Clear!
But they found an empty house.
Clear! Everything clear?
All clear, all clear.
Wilder had long abandoned it.
All clear.
He was on the run, days ahead of the federal agents. And every minute he remained free put another woman in jeopardy. The desperate chase had begun. March 1984. FBI agents conducted a meticulous search of the abandoned home belonging to Christopher Wilder. 2 women were missing and presumed dead at his hands. A third had barely escaped with her life after her kidnapping and rape. The agents needed something to clue them in to their suspect's present whereabouts.
You like his decorator? What happened to his maid?
But before he left, Wilder had prepared his home for any investigator.
The place had been manicured. There were basically no fingerprints left in Wilder's house. You're always going to find fingerprints inside a residence. It looked like everything had been totally cleaned.
FBI and local authorities canvassed Miami and West Palm Beach. But no one reported having seen or heard from Wilder since he left Linda Grober in a Georgia motel. The FBI alerted police to keep an eye out for Wilder's car. They asked banks and credit card companies to monitor any transactions he might make. But informational systems in 1984 moved slowly. The leads trickled in and were usually too late for a quick response. On March 21st, 1984, a sharp-eyed utility repairman in Central Florida noticed something unusual in a shallow creek. It was the barely recognizable body of a young woman. She was later identified as 21-year-old Teresa Ferguson. Witnesses last saw her 3 days earlier, leaving a shopping mall with a man fitting Wilder's description. The autopsy showed she'd been beaten with a tire iron and strangled to death. The victim's profile and the savagery of the crime suggested Wilder. But nothing directly tied him to it. If it was the Australian contractor, the FBI agents knew they had a serial killer on the loose. One that had to be stopped before he murdered again. Agents continued to follow the suspect's trail. An automatic security camera photographed Wilder at a bank in Tampa. The bank records showed that he had emptied his accounts of more than $19,000. It was an ominous break. Their prey now had the money to travel far and wide. By March 22nd, 1984, Wilder was already in Texas. Witnesses saw him approach 23-year-old Terry Walden in the parking lot of Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. Walden was a wife, mother of 2, and a nursing student.
Yes, I'm a photographer. My job is to know.
Wilder asked her if she'd like to do some modeling.
Make a lot of extra money. You sure you don't want to keep the card and think about it?
But Wilder couldn't seduce Walden with his pitch.
Okay.
She politely declined. She had no way of knowing that she would soon see him again. While the FBI began its national hunt, witnesses later told investigators that Wilder had stayed in Beaumont, Texas another day. This time he went back to familiar territory to stalk his next victim.
They have this one is $7.99 or $9.99.
He visited the local mall, shopping for a young woman to deceive with dreams of glamour.
You're taking some fashion photography? No, listen. You don't have to blind me. I'm legit. It's okay.
But no one succumbed to his bogus promises.
No, sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
After getting brushed off several times, he spotted a familiar face. It was Terry Walden.
Hey, hi.
She had come to run errands after dropping her 4-year-old daughter off at daycare.
Are you interested now? Will you take the card and just consider?
Terry again turned Wilder down.
No. I'm sure you could.
But this time, he wouldn't take no for an answer. As she left the mall, Wilder followed her out to her car. In broad daylight, in the middle of a crowded mall parking lot, Wilder attacked Walden. He knocked her unconscious and pushed her into her Mercury Cougar. He grabbed his bags and drove off in the victim's car. Walden's husband reported her missing later that afternoon when she failed to pick up her daughter at daycare. But by then, it was too late. Terry Walden's body was found floating in a canal near Beaumont, Texas, a few days later. The police recovered Wilder's Chrysler a few miles away.
Some fiber and some hair in here. Let's get a couple pictures of this, Jim, before we take the stuff out.
An FBI forensic search of the car uncovered hair and fibers matching Teresa Ferguson, the young woman discovered by the repairman 5 days before. It confirmed what the agents had suspected all along. Teresa Ferguson had been Wilder's fourth known victim.
Get on the floor, bro.
McNeil and Hanlon estimated that the killer was still at least 2 days ahead of them. Out of the Miami office, they broadcast a national all-points bulletin for Terry Walden's stolen car.
Every state police agency along the way, every state trooper who was out on that highway knew the car we were looking for. And unfortunately, it's amazing sometimes you say, okay, well, he's in a purple car. We say, how many purple cars are out there? Well, it's amazing how many purple cars are out there when you're looking for purple cars. And that was the problem. We never knew at the time what license plate he was using on that particular vehicle.
FBI teletypes clattered endlessly. Every field office in the country received page after page describing Wilder's physical appearance, his victim profiles, where he had last been identified, and where he was thought to be heading. The technology of 1984, however, could not keep up with the pace of his flight.
There were so many leads on Wilder going back and forth all over the country. Every one of them went to all FBI offices for information that the FBI teletype system was backed up over 48 hours for about 2 weeks because of the volume of information that was flowing back and forth on Wilder.
That left the Bureau with only one certain way to track Wilder. They had to follow the grisly trail of corpses he discarded as he ran. The next victim was 21-year-old Suzanne Logan. She was last seen shopping at a mall near Oklahoma City. A fisherman stumbled upon her body 2 days after she disappeared. The location of her disappearance and the manner in which she died all suggested one thing. She had died at the hands of Christopher Wilder.
In this particular case, we had an individual who was kidnapping, raping, torturing, and murdering a woman about every day and a half. So there was intense pressure, as there should be.
Slow technology and a fast fugitive hampered the FBI. But on March 28th, they got the break they had hoped for. Wilder checked into a motel in Rifle, Colorado, using a stolen Visa card. The FBI knew he had the card and was using it, but they had not been able to trace it until Rifle.
In those days, 1984, they didn't have the instant validation of your credit card when you walk into a hotel. They only called in bills that were going to exceed $100. Every motel that Wilder stayed along his murderous route, the charges were in the vicinity of $50 to $60.
Perhaps from sheer boredom, the motel clerk decided to call in the credit card that night instead of waiting to mail it the next day. Instead of approval, the clerk received a phone number to call immediately. An early morning call mobilized the FBI's Denver, Colorado field office. At last, the FBI knew where the fugitive was. In the early hours of the morning of March 29th, 4 agents approached Wilder's motel room, confident that they had finally cornered the killer.
Okay. FBI! Search warrant! Go! FBI!
He wasn't there. As swiftly as the FBI had responded, Wilder had eluded them. For some unknown reason, the fugitive had departed before sunrise.
He's not in the hotel.
It had been the best lead the agency had, and it failed. Once again, the exasperated task force had no idea of where the predator was. Yet they feared it was one of the dozens of shopping malls within a day's drive of Rifle, Colorado. March 29th, 1984. In just 3 weeks, the Australian contractor Christopher Wilder had abducted 4 women and murdered 3 of them. FBI agents noticed a pattern developing in the campaign of violence. The killer kept his direction westward, and he had narrowed his hunting grounds to shopping malls. "18-year-old Cheryl Bonaventura was last seen at the Mesa Shopping Mall in Grand Junction, Colorado. The FBI would later connect Wilder to her death.
You had a man that you knew was on the prowl. You had a man who you knew as each day goes by that some poor soul in deathly fear of her life was dying in an extremely extremely painful way.
To get the word out, the FBI cast a wide net. Across the country, agents notified security officers and mall managers about the danger, telling them to be on the lookout for the Australian. Investigators supplied malls with photos and flyers that were posted to alert shoppers. Despite the FBI warnings, a teen magazine held a cover girl competition at the Meadows Mall in Las Vegas. Wilder showed up, armed with his camera. He chatted with several of the teens during the event, but eventually zeroed in on Michelle Korfman. The 17-year-old had driven up the 25 miles from her family's Boulder City, Nevada home. Nervous about participating in her first model search, she had asked her friends and family to let her go alone. After a few minutes' conversation with Wilder, Korfman changed her clothes and left the mall with him.
Yeah, sure, I do.
That's great.
It was April 1st. As soon as Vegas authorities alerted the FBI that a local girl had disappeared at a mall, agents responded. They asked for all pictures that anyone had taken of the fashion show. One photographer immediately delivered 5 rolls of film.
And when they printed those photographs, there was the Korfman girl on stage in a modeling type pose, and who's directly beyond her, about 20 feet away, looking at her with what I call the look of a homicidal maniac, none other than Christopher Wilder.
Like the others, young Michelle Korfman suffered at the hands of Wilder. He bound and gagged her with duct tape. Then he beat, raped, and tortured her.
and you will see incisions in the body. They may only be 1 inch to 1.5 inches long, and they're not deep. They're done just enough to make it bleed. They were only meant to torture, not to kill, until he finally actually killed the victims. He was a brutal sexual sadist.
Prowling shopping centers and other areas.
On April 5th, 4 days after the Michelle Korfman disappearance, the FBI held a press conference. They announced the placement of Christopher Wilder on its famed 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list.
10 most wanted.
For 50 years, the list has helped generate the publicity needed to catch violent fugitives.
Hey, Val.
Special Agent Tron Brecky serves as national spokesman for the FBI.
Thank you.
The criteria for the top 10 was met with Wilder. He was a menace to society, he was extremely dangerous, a violent individual on whom charges were outstanding, and he had fled the area where we thought that he might be. Therefore, it was very important for us to get the message out to the American public and to the media that he could be anywhere in the United States.
But Wilder's addition to the 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list came a day too late for Tina Marie Rosico. In Lomita, California, on the day before the press conference, the 16-year-old visited the Del Amo Fashion Center Mall to apply for a summer job.
What a beautiful face you have.
The high school student wanted the work to save for a car. She met Christopher Wilder when he said that she was perfect for a modeling gig he had to shoot.
And actually, you're so perfect that I could give you $100 right here.
He gave her $100 cash and promised much more to come.
If you're right, and I know you are, I can tell you are. Do you have a few minutes to just go out and look at clothes and stuff? Take some pictures in front of you. I say to myself, this girl is perfect.
Wilder drove Tina Marie to a nearby park. At first, everything progressed as if it were a legitimate job. He said the scenic location had perfect light for the camera.
This canopy right here, I think, is really lovely. Right?
As the shoot began, an eager Tina Marie worked to please her photographer.
Yeah, just look sort of.
When Wilder told her to smile, she did. When he told her to tilt her head, she did. And then it all turned wrong.
Now, get in the car. All right?
He pointed a .357 Magnum at her face and told her to get in the car.
Quickly, quickly.
The terrified teen had no choice but to obey. Wilder brought Tina Marie Rosico to a motel in San Diego. There, like all the others, he beat his teenage victim, tied her to the bed, and raped her repeatedly. Wilder cut her with his knife and electrocuted her using wires he would tie to different parts of her body. The brutality perplexed Agent Hanlon.
You say to yourself, why would anybody want to do that to anybody? To scare them so bad, to brutalize them so bad, to torture them with an electrical cord, and then kill them like a piece of trash. And that person knows they're going to be killed. I mean, up until some point, the great realization comes over that individual, I'm not going to survive this. My life's over. And these are young women.
He identifies himself as a professional photographer, commenting on a young woman's appearance and attempts to persuade her to accompany him from the area.
Just as Tina's life was about to end, a special news bulletin captured Wilder's attention.
Dangerous, and this approach may lead to his apprehension. Christopher Bernard Wilder has been placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The
It was the FBI press conference. Wilder watched in horror as his picture was plastered on television sets across the nation. The federal agents proclaimed him the most wanted fugitive in America. They held him responsible for the disappearances of 6 young women. They didn't know about the 7th victim in the hotel room with him.
We gotta move, come on.
Wilder panicked. He grabbed Tina Marie and hit the road.
Come on, we gotta move.
But now that he was top on the 10 most wanted fugitives list, Wilder landed on the front page of every newspaper and on the top of every newscast in the country.
It's the front page headline in every newspaper in America. Every news show, every radio show is talking about Christopher Wilder and showing his picture and saying his name, Christopher Wilder.
The FBI hoped that by plastering Wilder's face across TV screens and newspapers, someone, somewhere, would spot him. It was the best chance agents had to stop Wilder before he destroyed another life. In the spring of 1984, the FBI conducted the largest manhunt in history for the rapist and murderer, Christopher Wilder. They knew of at least 6 victims. They suspected there were many more. Wilder had squeezed through the FBI net in Nevada as he headed back east. With him was a 16-year-old hostage named Tina Marie Rosico. On April 10, 1984, outside a shopping mall in Gary, Indiana, Christopher Wilder told Rosico that he would let her go on one condition. She had to help him catch his next victim. For 6 days, the adolescent had been raped, beaten, and terrorized. She was ready to do whatever he asked. Wilder noticed Dawnette Wilt ducking into several shops. He figured she was job hunting in the mall. Rosico told Dawnette that Wilder was a store manager and wanted her to fill out a job application at his car. When they reached his car, Wilder drew his pistol and forced Dawnette to get in.
Sweetheart, why don't you just come with us? Get the car. Get in. Go around, go around.
He sped off with the 2 girls. Witnesses saw them leave.
A young woman, very attractive, as were all of Wilder's victims, had been taken from was seen leaving with an individual who they believed to be Christopher Wilder from a mall in the Indianapolis area. And so when that information came to us, we felt that, okay, now we know he's headed back east.
The Bureau directed every agent east of the Mississippi to work on the case. Despite his promise, Wilder refused to release Tina Marie. Instead, he forced Rosico to watch while he tortured and raped Dawnette in front of her. The nightmare continued for 2 days. On the morning of April 12, 1984, Tina Marie heard a familiar voice on the morning news.
Any kind of energy, and just put Tina come home alive safely. You know, we're all rooting for you.
The word that we've got
on national television, Tina Marie's mother begged the kidnapper not to hurt her daughter.
Is your daughter, and that there is every indication that your daughter is still alive. And
Wilder flew into another panic. He packed up his hostages and
dressed.
left.
Get her dressed and you get dressed. Now.
Wilder complained that it was only a matter of time before the FBI caught up with him. He stopped the car in a wooded area near Penn Yan, New York. He ordered Rosico not to move. Dawnette was drugged with sleeping pills, yet he forced her to march into the forest. Left alone, Tina Marie pondered the opportunity to escape. But the horror of the last 9 days had broken her mentally. She stayed put. Walking through the woods, Dawnette Wilt slowly woke up to the realization that Wilder was going to kill her. She didn't want to die by stabbing. She begged him to shoot her instead. Ignoring her pleas, Wilder stabbed her through the chest twice and left her for dead.
Okay, here we go.
As he began to drive away, the fear that Dawnette Wilt might still be alive seized him. He returned to the scene to properly dispose of Dawnette.
You stay here. You stay here. You hear?
When he got there, he could scarcely believe what he saw. She was gone. Incredibly, Dawnette Wilt had survived. Stabbed twice, bleeding profusely, drugged and beaten, she had managed to pull herself up and escape to a road where a passing motorist rescued her. Thanks to Wilt's testimony, the FBI now pinned Wilder in the Northeast, still driving the Mercury Cougar he had stolen from Terry Walden. But for how long?
After he went back and found out that she was no longer there, he realized obviously that he had to do something with this vehicle. He needed a new vehicle. And he got into western New York State.
Once again, he headed for the nearest mall. This time in Victor, New York, where he spotted a gold Pontiac Firebird. He told Rosico she would take the wheel of the Cougar and follow him wherever he went. He carjacked 33-year-old Beth Dodge. At gunpoint, Wilder forced her into the back seat of her Firebird. The emotionally shattered Tina Marie did as she was ordered. Wilder drove for a half an hour to a secluded area.
Come on, get out. Come on, just get out. Just get out. Just get out. Listen, I want you to get the white suitcase, and I want you to get the camera, and I want you to put it in this car and wait for me, you understand?
He forced Beth Dodge into the woods. Moments later, Tina Marie heard 2 shots echo out from the trees. There had been no rape, no torture this time. Wilder had simply killed Dodge for her car. But he had a different fate in mind for Tina Marie. In all the hell he had put her through, Wilder had bonded with Tina Marie. He told her he didn't want her to be around when the end came. He drove Tina Marie Rosico to the airport in Boston and gave her money for a ticket home to Los Angeles. Her ordeal was finally over. Once safely home, Tina Marie would fill in details for agents about Wilder's murderous rampage. Wilder was now alone, and the agents didn't want to wait till another victim disappeared to clue them into his whereabouts.
During the search for Wilder, we knew that he had friends in Canada and had visited Canada extensively. So we felt there was a good chance that he was heading directly east and then north into Canada.
Wilder raced toward the border in Beth Dodge's Firebird. For 3 weeks, he had beaten the FBI's best efforts. Even the 10 most wanted fugitives list had failed to produce his capture. Agents McNeil and Hanman desperately wanted to stop the killer before he struck again or fled their jurisdiction. By April 1984, Christopher Wilder had left 7 women dead across America. 3 more were presumed dead. 3 others had survived with rapes and beatings. The FBI believed that he was in New England, heading north. Federal agents concentrated their resources in the northeastern states before he could escape across the Canadian border.
I mean, the FBI had agents out circularizing in and wanted poster out and that kind of thing, but the best thing you have going for you are the hundreds of police officers up in that area who are many more eyes and ears than FBI agents available in New England.
On Friday, April 13th, 1984, Wilder stopped for gas in the tiny town of Colebrook, New Hampshire, about a dozen miles from the Canadian border. While he filled the tank, he casually asked an attendant about the paperwork that might be needed to cross the border. 2 state troopers, Wayne Fortier and Leo Jellison, spotted Beth Dodge's car. They, like almost every police department in the country, had been told to be on the lookout for the Firebird and for a man of Wilder's description. Jellison asked Wilder if he could speak with him.
Buddy, can I talk for a second? Please! Get out of the car!
Wilder leaped into the Firebird and grabbed his .357 Magnum. In the struggle, the weapon went off. Officer Jellison was shot in the chest. He would live. But Christopher Wilder would not. The bullet that wounded Officer Jellison first passed through Wilder. It pierced his heart, killing him instantly. Wilder's cross-country reign of terror ended with a 10th death. His own. Authorities ultimately recovered the mutilated bodies of Cheryl Bonaventura and Michelle Korfman in the months afterwards. But the 2 missing women that started the investigation, Rosario Gonzalez and Beth Kenyon, were never found. Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon went to their graves without knowing the fate of their daughter. Other victims and their loved ones have struggled to restore their shattered lives.
Are you my friend?
Linda Grober has also learned a chilling lesson.
I think an important point to make is that these people are not always demons, and they don't always have tattoos, they don't always have long hair. They're often extremely eloquent, and they're disguised, and they can fit easily into your father's living room after dinner sipping a wine or a brandy.
The terrifying truth is that Christopher Wilder was not unique. He made the most wanted fugitives list, but there are dozens of killers like him each year that never reach national attention. They trawl our shopping centers, our schools, and our churches, searching for victims. Vivid dreams of easy fame and fortune can quickly darken. Only through public awareness, tireless vigilance, and the resourcefulness of the FBI can we hope to keep these predators at bay. On the morning of March 3rd, 1993, in Silver Spring, Maryland, Vivian Rice stopped by her sister's house on her way to work. But this morning, something was wrong. Both garage doors were open, and her sister's minivan was missing. Inside the house, Vivian would discover a brutal triple homicide, executed by one of the most ruthless and cunning killers to ever challenge the FBI.
When 3 people were found murdered in their home, it appeared like a burglary gone awry. But a crime this horrific deserved a closer look. The suspect who had the most to gain from the deaths also had the perfect alibi. Photographic proof that he was 3,000 miles away when the crime was committed. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It's our job to find the holes in even the most bulletproof alibi. In this case, we had our work cut out for us.
A Montgomery County, Maryland police officer responded to Vivian Rice's frantic 911 call. He found a female victim dead just inside the front door. He also found a second woman dead. And a young boy, apparently murdered in his bed.
We got 3 victims here. Need detectives and evidence technicians over here.
Through the day and into the night, investigators would scour the scene for evidence, thoroughly searching both inside and outside the house. They soon identified all the victims. Mildred Horn was a 43-year-old divorced mother employed as an American Airlines flight attendant. She had been shot 3 times in the head. Her 8-year-old quadriplegic son, Trevor, who required round-the-clock nursing care, appeared to have been suffocated. Police found him disconnected from his respirator. And Trevor's overnight nurse, 38-year-old Janice Saunders, had been shot twice, in the skull and in the eye. Evidence technicians began work immediately. They were thorough, but there was little evidence to collect. They dug a single distorted bullet fragment from the wood beside Trevor's window. Investigators took swabs of blood, carefully collecting samples for DNA testing. But the blood would match only the victim's DNA. With so little to lead investigators to a suspect, technicians scrounged harder for clues, collecting anything and everything that seemed promising. Outside the house, investigators found a metal file. Police were thorough, but the killer had been meticulous. Montgomery County, Maryland homicide detective Craig Wittenberger, named lead investigator, struggled to make sense of a case with 3 helpless victims, no obvious motive, and few clues.
There were some things that struck us as odd, I think, from the very beginning of the on-scene investigation inside the house. The foyer area, a closet, the contents had been dumped, everything been pulled out of the closet, dumped onto the floor. We found a purse, which we would later learn ultimately belonged to Millie. You had a lot of stereo entertainment equipment, TVs, a lot of jewelry, furs, that was untouched and left. Which again strikes you as odd. If this is a burglary or a robbery gone bad, you're going to take something.
In fact, Mildred's minivan was missing from the garage, as her sister had noticed. But it was found quickly, not far from the house. Some of Mildred's credit cards were also missing, but found the next day on a nearby roadside by a jogger. Investigators now positively eliminated burglary as a motive. Instead, they wondered if the missing items were a deliberate attempt by the killer to throw them off his trail. The scene had the earmarks of a planned, professional execution. As for a suspect, at the crime scene, Vivian told them Mildred's ex-husband, Lawrence Horn, was probably responsible. She begged them to investigate it. He quickly became the prime suspect.
All the family members were giving us this information that kept pointing to Lawrence Horn, that would be based on the very stormy, rocky relationship that Millie and Lawrence Horn had had for many, many years.
Danny, could you get this drum set up in number 5 for me, please?
All right.
Investigators learned that in the 1960s and 70s, Horn had been a top producer and recording engineer for Motown Records, credited with many hits, including Shotgun by Junior Walker and the All-Stars. He'd married Mildred, an airline attendant, in 1973. Then he'd moved with Motown from Detroit to Los Angeles.
Okay, give me the test.
But when the company's fortunes waned, so did his. He and Mildred divorced in 1987, but their problems continued. As Bob Dean, Maryland Assistant State's Attorney, soon discovered.
We did some research on Lawrence Horn in the courthouse that day, particularly what the status of his child support payments were and whatever civil aspects of his ongoing civil battle with his wife were. And he had just been held in contempt several months before for failure to pay $18,000 in child support.
But in reviewing more court records, investigators learned that on March 3rd, the day of the murders, Horn's financial outlook had brightened considerably. With his wife and son dead, he now stood to inherit $1.7 million. The money came from a malpractice settlement awarded to Trevor when a routine operation left him with brain damage. Should Trevor die, the settlement also listed his beneficiaries.
The beneficiaries of Trevor were obviously his mother and his father, and that was Millie and Lawrence. If Millie were dead, Lawrence got everything.
Hello, Miss Horn? Yes.
At Detective Wittenberger's request, the Los Angeles Police Department contacted Lawrence Horn within hours of the murders.
Lawrence, I think you better come out here.
Yes, Mother.
They tracked him to his mother's house.
Mr. Horn? I'm
The police told Horn about the murders and were surprised by his response.
Am I a suspect?
No, sir.
Mr. Horn's behavior was very odd. It was odd enough that the LAPD officers took note of it from the very outset. Not only did he not want to cooperate and want an attorney, basically his only questions or inquiries about were whether he was a suspect in this thing.
Police took him to the station for further questioning. They asked where he was at the time of the crime. He told them he was with his live-in girlfriend, Shira Bogan,
I was at home.
and described their activities. Later they would question her, and she'd corroborate his story.
I was at home.
If Horn or someone he employed had crossed state lines to commit the crime, they would have violated the Interstate Travel in Aid of Racketeering statute, a federal offense under FBI jurisdiction. Now, the FBI was brought in. A heinous crime had shocked the quiet community of Silver Spring, Maryland. A triple murder that brutally ended the lives of a quadriplegic boy, his mother, and his overnight nurse. With the prime suspect 3,000 miles away in Los Angeles, the prospect of an interstate investigation loomed. Local detectives called on the FBI.
Okay, all right, goodbye.
Special Agent Ed Roach was named case agent.
The case immediately became a coast-to-coast investigation because the principal suspect was living at that time in Los Angeles. So we involved the Los Angeles division of the FBI. Perhaps that we could assist later in the investigation, either through profiling at Quantico or with the assistance of the FBI laboratory.
Desperate for more clues, investigators sent a canine team back to where Mildred Horn's credit cards had been found by a jogger. The team soon recovered a rusty piece of metal, badly corroded, but clearly a gun part. Wittenberger sent it to the FBI lab for testing. FBI examiners determined the part was a trigger mechanism from an AR-7 rifle. A gun that's easy to disassemble into small pieces for transport or disposal, which seemed exactly what the killer had done. He had also taken another step to distance himself from the weapon. He'd very carefully drilled out the serial number. Often, a trained examiner can piece these numbers back together, but this killer had erased them for good. Another firearms expert would determine how long the gun part had lain by the side of the road. Analysis showed the amount of corrosion was consistent with the time elapsed since the killings had occurred. So this was likely the murder weapon. While the FBI lab processed the gun part, investigators in Maryland interviewed Tiffany Horn, Lawrence and Mildred's 18-year-old daughter.
Right straight ahead.
She was a student at Howard University in Washington, D.C. They gave her a routine polygraph test, which she easily passed.
Did you commit those murders?
No.
Later that day, Tiffany would talk with Detective Wittenberger, revealing 3 key clues. The first was something that had happened in the summer of 1992. Her father had called, asking her to videotape the outside of her mother's house for him, along with Trevor's room. The idea was so bizarre, she'd only taped Trevor and his nurse, with Trevor in his bed, attached to his respirator. Tiffany gave the tape to her father. Now Wittenberger and the FBI wondered if Horn wanted someone to know the layout of the house. Then, on March 1st, 2 days before the murders, Horn had called her again. He wanted to know where his younger daughter, Tamiel, would be for the next few days. Tiffany said Tamiel would be with Aunt Vivian the night of March 2nd, because her mother was flying out on an early flight the morning of March 3rd. It made investigators suspect that Horn had known when the murders would occur. Tiffany shared one other revealing incident that day. At about 2:30, the morning of the murders, she had inadvertently called her mother. Tiffany had hit the wrong speed dial key on her phone. She'd meant to call her boyfriend. She apologized and hung up. The timing of the call helped investigators estimate the timing of the murders, along with another observation. Trevor's round-the-clock nurses made entries every hour in a logbook near his bed.
Based on that, the 2:30 phone call, the 2 o'clock entry in the nurse's log, and there not being a 3 o'clock entry, and the autopsy findings, I think we pretty much based the time of death as being around between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning.
On March 11th, about a week after the murders, Wittenberger and his partner flew to L.A.
Police officer, search warrant!
With the assistance of the Los Angeles Police Department, they carried a probable cause affidavit to search Horn's apartment. They collected hundreds of audio and videotapes. Police also gathered computers, personal papers, address books, bank statements, and telephone logs.
Still got about 2 to 3 hours more to go.
Back at the station, investigators began the time-consuming task of reviewing all they'd recovered. They'd printed thousands of pages from the hard drives of Horn's computers. They found he'd made handwritten notes on documents regarding Trevor's settlement money. The notes confirmed what they already suspected. Horn was well aware he could gain a fortune from his son's death, and he was well versed in the legalities of the settlement. Investigators also found a map that was telling. It was hand-drawn, showing Mildred Horn's neighborhood. The streets were outlined and labeled. An X and her initials marked her house. Had Horn been directing a stranger to find her? Perhaps a contract killer. In the hundreds of hours of videotape that were recovered and screened, one home movie stood out. Horn had videotaped himself standing in front of his television set, which was tuned to the cable TV program guide station. The station was clearly broadcasting the time and date. 11:45 p.m., March 2nd, 1993, California time. 2:45 a.m., March 3rd, Maryland time. Exactly the time and date of the murders. Investigators quickly dubbed it the alibi tape, since it seemed to have been created for that purpose. Now, Wittenberger and the FBI seemed to have some substantial leads, but they were still far from apprehending the mastermind of this brutal crime.
There he is again. Same shit. He's walking back.
When investigators searched the LA apartment of their prime suspect in a triple murder, they discovered a suspicious videotape. Among themselves, they called it the alibi tape. But they would soon find a recording that was even more incriminating. A 22-second excerpt from Horn's dozens of audio tapes. It was from a conversation between Horn and an unknown male. The words were cryptic, but their meaning was clear.
Can you play that?
I gave a talk?
No.
Okay. All right, so I'm sitting there.
Can you,
Take a picture. I can take a picture of him, right basically there, but I couldn't, the noise, you understand what I'm saying? I wasn't able to do that, and I didn't want to go front-wise.
After listening to that, we felt Mr. Horn probably was in Los Angeles at the time. We also felt after listening to that conversation that this was probably the individual that committed these homicides making that phone call.
With the help of the FBI, investigators subpoenaed telephone records from AT&T for all the calls placed to Lawrence Horn's residence from a week before the murders to a week after. Most were useless, but 4 long-distance calls stood out. 2 had been made just days before the murders from a Detroit payphone. The other 2 were made in the early hours of March 3rd from payphones near Mildred Horn's house. One from outside a Denny's restaurant, and the other from a Days Inn. The call from the Denny's was made to the home of Lawrence Horn at 5:12 a.m. Maryland time, just a few hours after the murders.
What is going on? What time is it?
Was it the cryptic 22-second conversation?
Yeah.
And who had made the call? Investigators spent hours scanning dozens of registration forms from local motels.
A check of the hotels and the motels in the area, a few miles circumference of the murder scene, turned up an individual checking in approximately midnight the day these murders were committed to the day's end, using a Michigan driver's license in the name of James Edward Perry.
James Edward Perry seemed a promising suspect. With Lawrence Horn's roots in Detroit's music industry and the Detroit call in his telephone records, perhaps there was a connection. Background checks revealed he'd served about 10 years' time for shooting a Michigan state trooper after an attempted bank robbery in the early 1970s. Now he was a minister.
He claimed he would be able to pick lottery numbers for people. People could call him for his advice. He had business cards and flyers that he would hand out, that he was, like I say, a minister. I believe he called himself on some of these things Apostle James.
As investigators learned more about Perry, Wittenberger had picked up another trail. In Lawrence Horn's telephone records, he'd noticed some calls had been made on a calling card.
What do you want?
He subpoenaed the records. The name on the card was Camilla McKinney. FBI agents appeared at Camilla's address. Instead, they found Marcia Webb. It turned out she was Lawrence Horn's cousin.
Oh, no.
She said Horn had asked her to get the card, claiming he needed it for business. She'd made up the name McKinney. She thought her past payment problems might keep her from getting a card. The calling card records revealed a complex web of phone calls. They began almost a year before the murders and continued for several months after.
We examined the records for that calling card account and saw that there were numerous calls throughout 1992 and 1993 from payphones in Los Angeles. Payphones that we plotted out on a street grid, primarily within walking distance of Lawrence Horn's house. It went directly to James Perry's house in Detroit.
Yeah, I could do it.
And likewise, there were numerous calls from 1992 to 1993 of payphones throughout Detroit, primarily on the east side of Detroit, which is where James Perry lived, to Lawrence Horn's house in Hollywood.
And we figured Perry was looking for the rest of his payment. And we surmised that that Horn was waiting for his windfall from his son's estate.
But if it seemed investigators had finally hit the jackpot, the prize remained just out of their grasp. Connecting suspects to calls required painstaking detective work, logging the time and phone number where each call was made and received, then attempting to place the suspects accordingly. Horn and Perry had covered their tracks with many layers of deception. Investigators were beginning to bog down, and their frustration was starting to show.
It starts out at an extremely fast pace. Everything's hot and heavy, very high-profile murder case. Everything, like I say, is rocking and rolling very quickly. Then, all of a sudden, the skids are put on. The investigation starts to slow down because now we've almost shifted gears and now going into a documentation that turns into almost a paper trail case.
But Wittenberger and the FBI stayed on the trail like bloodhounds. And in late September of 1993, they closed in on one James Perry. They began a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week surveillance.
We had the Michigan State Police and the FBI. Both agencies agreed to put him under surveillance in a cooperative effort. It was during a week in September that we saw that James Perry hung out with a particular individual. We didn't know who he was until we checked the tag of his car. It was a guy named Thomas Turner.
A background check showed the 52-year-old Turner was a trucker by trade. More significantly, he was another of Lawrence Horn's cousins. He was also fast friends with Perry. The two had met in prison 13 years before, when Perry was serving time for the state trooper shooting incident and Turner for robbing a bank. Identifying Turner would prove an important break in the case. But for now, investigators were hoping for something more immediate. Wittenberger and an agent did what investigators call tickling the wires. They paid Perry a visit, thinking Perry would then contact Horn and start talking. The investigators only talked briefly with Perry, but he admitted he was in Maryland on March 3rd, though he claimed it was for business and that he knew nothing about the murders. In September of '93, after weeks of wrangling for court authorization to tap Lawrence Horn's home phone, federal agents finally got the go-ahead. Special Agent Roach was key in obtaining the approval.
We were hoping to get the smoking gun, the conversation between James Edward Perry and Lawrence Horn. We were hoping for a conversation that would say something like, I want the rest of my money, you know, I did the deed, the down payment's not enough, you promised me such and such, I only got this, and now I want the rest of my money, or maybe you're going to be next. Something like that would have been terrific.
But Horn and Perry were too sly to let anything slip. And by mid-November, with the investigation at full tilt, they stopped talking to each other altogether. Despite months of slow but steady progress, Horn and Perry were still one step ahead of the law. The FBI's coast-to-coast investigation of a triple murder committed in Maryland left agents scrambling to link LA's Lawrence Horn and Detroit's James Perry to their case. Investigators knew the two men were talking, but they didn't know how. Were they using Perry's former jail buddy, Thomas Turner, as a go-between? The FBI secured authorization to tap Turner's phone.
Yep.
That was the key. Both Horn and Perry talked to Turner often, and Turner relayed messages between them. But they were careful not to use language that might incriminate them. And once again, agents found themselves back in the same old grind, monitoring and logging hundreds of calls, then trying to make links between the callers.
All right, I'll talk to you later. One surveillance would be taking place, actively taking place, physical surveillance in Los Angeles on Lawrence Horn, while at the same time, 24 hours a day, the Detroit division was conducting physical and electronic surveillance on Thomas Turner and physical surveillance on James Edward Perry.
As before, they made a few connections between calls and callers. But mostly, the process seemed just a test of their endurance and dedication. Horn and Perry were giving them a run for their money. Then, around Thanksgiving, after 3 grueling months, investigators got a bite. Perry was preparing to move. Agents secured a federal warrant to search his residence before he left. It was a dangerous mission, Perry had shot a Michigan police officer, and he was known to own high-powered weapons. An FBI SWAT team made the entry. Wittenberger and his partner followed. They roused Perry and his girlfriend from bed, catching them unaware and unarmed. Then they began to search the house. Police collected videotapes, bank statements, and other documents. Much of what they found seemed strangely out of place in the home of a so-called minister. There were voodoo relics, Soldier of Fortune magazines, and books on topics like criminal investigations, managing gunshot wounds, and interpreting bloodstain evidence. Investigators hoped to prove that Perry had bought the books as well. They called the publishers, getting only one hit from Paladin Press. A canceled check proved to be the turning point in the case. Perry had ordered 2 books from Paladin Press about a year before the murders. 2 chilling titles: Hitman, a manual for independent contractors, and How to Build Disposable Silencers.
When you read through those books, it was very disturbing to see the number of similarities and parallels from the Hitman book to what transpired inside Millie's home on March 3rd.
Finally, the pieces began to form a single picture. Mildred's missing minivan was explained. Perry had used it to get back to his rental car, which he'd parked some distance from the crime scene, as the book recommended. The credit cards found by a jogger on a road near the house also fit in neatly.
It said, if you want to make it look like a burglary, do a little bit of messing around the house, take some items and then throw them along the side of the road. It said, throw the pieces of the rifle along the side of the road. Another thing that the book recommended was to take a little narrow file and run it through the barrel of the rifle. And a little narrow file was found in the backyard with deposits of chemicals consistent with gunshot residue.
The book also suggested using an AR-7 rifle, exactly the gun whose trigger mechanism was found earlier. Likewise, examiners determined the single spent bullet found in Trevor's room was .22 caliber, popular with assassins. .22s distort when they enter a human body, so it's hard to match them to a gun. They're also small, quiet, and inexpensive. In January of 1994, there was another big break in the case. After months of pressure from Wittenberger, a grand jury subpoena finally brought in Thomas Turner. He agreed to talk in exchange for immunity.
1992. Could have.
In a deposition for a Maryland grand jury, Turner said his cousin, Lawrence Horn, had come for a visit in May of 1992, 5 months before the murders. Though Turner hadn't seen him in 20 years, Horn immediately complained of trouble with his ex-wife Mildred. Turner gave him the name of James Perry.
Yes, I'm sure.
That's all Turner would say, though Wittenberger believed he knew much more. Fortunately, he'd said enough.
At that point, because of what we had learned from Thomas Turner and what we had learned from the Hitman book and the wiretaps, we felt we were in a position to establish a conspiracy, to establish that James Perry had in fact carried out the killings.
That summer, Wittenberger struck. On July 19, 1994, he arrested Horn at his Los Angeles apartment without incident. Wittenberger would question him for 45 minutes at the police station, but Horn refused to talk about the crime. On the same day, FBI agents in Detroit were waiting for a judge to sign the warrants for the arrest of Perry. In the meantime, they conducted an overt surveillance. The tactic is designed to pressure a suspect while making sure he doesn't flee.
It wasn't supposed to be a covert surveillance, so we really didn't care if he saw them or not. We just didn't want it to be a confrontational surveillance until the warrants were signed.
Once the warrants were finalized, agents could arrest Perry. Until then, they would follow him in the open, knowing he knew they were there. They would keep him in sight at all times. Perry grew increasingly annoyed. The FBI didn't let up. It seemed Perry wondered what the FBI was trying to do, though he seemed more irritated than concerned. He drove off, still in clear view of agents. They didn't know where he was headed, but stayed with him anyway.
Watching.
He stopped to pick up a friend. A man the agents were not familiar with.
Stranger to me.
The two drove off in Perry's car, with the tail close behind.
Well, let's give him something to play with. Stay right on.
Then, incredulous, agents guessed where Perry was going. After only about an hour, the constant tail had made Perry so angry, he decided to file a complaint. Amazingly, he took his gripe straight to the Detroit FBI field office. Perry's timing was incredible. He and his friend arrived at the office just as FBI agents awaited final word on his arrest warrant.
I want to see an FBI agent now. This is a bad idea, Perry. Oh, now. This is not bad. I want to see an FBI agent right now.
Perry demanded to see an agent.
I'm not going to calm down.
And he was quickly accommodated. A clerk called Special Agent Roach.
Bring heat on yourself.
Bring him on in.
Come on, you're on your own now, man.
Sir, would you step aside, please?
While agents checked him for weapons, Perry confronted Roach, wanting to know if agents were going to arrest him or if they were just planning to harass him.
First of all, I appreciate it. And we told him in minutes, you were going to expect a phone call from Montgomery County, Maryland, telling us the warrants have been signed and you've been indicted for 3 counts of first-degree murder. And the telephone came in a few minutes later, and we advised him that he was, in fact, under arrest.
You have the right to remain silent.
But now, even with both men in custody, one question still remained. If Perry was the hired gun, how had Horn paid him for the crime? After months of relentless pursuit by local investigators and the FBI, the elusive Horn and Perry were finally in custody. But there remained a nagging question. How had Horn paid Perry for the crime? The answer came 2 months later, only as a result of still more dogged detective work.
As we were reviewing the results of the search on James Perry's house, we noticed this photograph that in essence showed various cassette tapes that James Perry had. That was the purpose of the photograph, but underneath one of the items here, we saw a Western Union card. We got a bundle of records from Western Union showing us that there were indeed a number of transactions from Los Angeles to James Perry's live-in girlfriend Pauline McGee. The person sending it was George Bernard Shaw. Well, we now had another area to investigate for a few months.
After much digging, Dean discovered a man named George Bernard Shaw had died in July of 1992 in an auto accident in Los Angeles. When Dean sleuthed out the LA Times for the day of Shaw's death, he discovered the man's connection, though it wasn't in his obituary.
We have on the front page, Mary Wells dies. And for those in our generation, she was a big Motown star. Go to the obituary page, big story about Mary Wells dying in Los Angeles. In the lower right-hand corner was a list of other people who had passed away. One is a guy named George Bernard Shaw, with no information about him, just the cemetery.
Lawrence Horn had used the name of this anonymous dead man as the front for his payments, which were made with the money Horn was able to save. Almost 2 years after the crime, investigators had finally pieced together the whole story. It had been a cold and calculated murder for hire that took more than a year to plan. James Perry had followed the instructions in the Hitman book almost to a T. Perry had bought an AR-7 rifle and drilled out the serial number as the book suggested. And he'd built a disposable silencer using the book's directions. He'd carefully cut the parts and assembled it. He also packed a bag of supplies, a brown mechanic suit so he could walk through Mildred's neighborhood looking like a repairman, and latex gloves so he'd leave no fingerprints. In the months before the crime, he and Horn had talked often, discussing each detail. At Perry's request, Horn had sent him a map of Mildred's neighborhood and a video of Trevor's room. Horn had chosen a date when Tamiel would be out of the house, his only show of mercy in this heinous crime. On the appointed day, Perry had driven a car rented by Turner from Detroit. He checked into a motel near Mildred's house in Maryland. Perry had paid cash, as the book recommended, hoping the motel wouldn't require an ID.
I have to see some ID.
Paying cash.
I need to see.
But it did.
It's policy.
Without his Xerox driver's license, police might never have cracked the case.
We couldn't believe that he did something that dumb, that put him in Silver Spring, Maryland, on the date and the time of the murders.
Then, he'd driven his rental car to a shopping center near Mildred's house and walked from there, following Horn's hand-drawn map. In the house, unsuspecting, Nurse Janice Saunders made the 2 a.m. entry on a medical log attached to Trevor's bed. Perry approached the French doors at the back of the house, as planned. Though locked, the doors were easily opened. He entered, barely making a sound. Inside, he assembled his rifle and homemade silencer. He likely took Saunders completely by surprise. But when the boy stopped breathing, his medical alarm spoke for him. Upstairs, his mother awoke. Mildred Horn went downstairs to investigate. There, she too met the killer. Harry shot Mildred 3 times in the face. Then Perry roughed up the house a little to make it look like a robbery gone bad. As the book instructed, he took Mildred's credit cards. But it seems the persistent beeping of the medical alarm unnerved even this calculating killer. He stuck to the manual instructions. On his way out, he quickly bored out the gun barrel, using the metal file to foil ballistics tests as the book instructed. For a quick escape, he took Mildred's minivan back to where his rental car was parked. On the way, he'd scattered Mildred's credit cards and the gun parts, though only the trigger mechanism was found.
All right, so I'm sitting there.
Can you,
I can take a picture of him, right, basically there, but I couldn't, the noise, you understand what I'm saying? I wasn't able to do that, and I didn't want to go frontwise.
It was a case that had to be put together by really an exhaustive search of every clue possible, every clue imaginable. And we literally spent 1.5 years, 2 years doing nothing but working on this case.
In September of 1995, 2.5 years after the murders, James Perry was brought to trial in Maryland. Bob Dean served as special prosecutor because of his intimate knowledge of the case. Perry received life for conspiracy and 3 death sentences for the murders. Those death sentences were later commuted to life. Perry has no chance for parole. He is never admitted to committing the crime. Lawrence Horn's trial began that April in a packed Maryland courtroom. He faced the same charges as Perry, so much of the same evidence was used. Bob Dean again served as special prosecutor. After a 5-week trial, the jury found Horn guilty on all counts. He showed no emotion, and like Perry, he never confessed to the crime. On May 13th, Horn received 3 life sentences without parole. He appealed once and was denied.
I think both Mr. Horn and Mr. Perry did a very good job in planning this, and they came very close to getting away with this.
There would be one more bittersweet victory for the families of the victims. Following the murders, they filed a federal lawsuit against the publishers of Hitman, a technical manual for independent contractors. In late May of 1999, they won the suit, including a multi-million-dollar settlement and a promise from the publisher to stop selling the book. A sleepy southern town becomes a place of unimaginable horror as young girls begin disappearing. A cunning serial killer is on the loose, tormenting a family while evading capture. Until investigators could find a way to stop him, he would continue his hunt for more victims.
was a predator, abducting girls and young women from their own front yards in broad daylight. He was a sadist, phoning one victim's family, taunting them, boosting, then dashing their hope. And he wouldn't stop until we stopped him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. This serial killer, whoever he was, could pass unnoticed in society. Yet he craved the attention his crimes provided. Somewhere in this contradiction lay the key to his exposure.
May 31st, 1985. The afternoon sun over South Carolina roasted the town of Lexington to a blistering 100 degrees. Sherry Faye Smith had found relief from the heat at a pool party with her boyfriend and fellow high school seniors. She was looking forward to the carefree days between her final exams and graduation. All of summer and the rest of her life awaited the ambitious 17-year-old. She lived with her family in a quiet, rural community, a safe place tucked away on the edge of town. The Smiths' home sat on a generous lot of dense woods. The house was about 200 yards from the road. Sherry's dad, Robert Smith, served as a local pastor. This Friday afternoon, he worked at home in his second-floor office. He looked up from his studies to see his daughter pulling into the driveway and stopping to get the mail. In the next few moments, life in Lexington, South Carolina, changed forever. Expecting Sherry to walk in the house, Mr. Smith looked out the window again. He noticed her car remained near the mailbox, but she was nowhere in sight. Immediately, he felt something was odd. He decided to take a look. Sherry suffered from diabetes. With her blood sugar out of balance, she might become disoriented or incapacitated. When he arrived at the bottom of the driveway, Mr. Smith found Sherry's car still running, and the door swung open.
Sherry?
But his daughter was gone. There was no response to his call.
Sherry?
His mind began to race as he imagined the possibilities. Could she be lying in the woods somewhere, unconscious or in shock?
Sherry?
He yelled louder as he grew more frantic with worry.
Sherry?
There was no sign of her anywhere. Sherry was gone. Mr. Smith immediately called for help. The assistant sheriff of Lexington County responded to the call. The distraught father explained that Sherry was not the type to just run off.
I'm not sure what happened, but how much time
She was responsible, warm, and well-adjusted. Not the sort of teenager to run away. But the sheriff took nothing for granted. He questioned Smith about his relationship with his daughter. Today, more than a decade later, Assistant Sheriff Louis McCarty vividly recalls his impressions of the Smith family during his first conversation with Sherry's father.
We discussed his daughter's grades, what kind of child she was. It was determined that there was no animosity between mother and father and daughter. The Smith family was a very, very close-knit family, a very religious family. You just had the sixth sense that they were extremely close, that this child would not have run away on her own.
The investigator couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had happened to Sherry Smith. and the same intuition told him it had nothing to do with her medical condition. Every minute that passed increased the likelihood that Sherry might never be found. Knowing this, the sheriff called for assistance, bypassing the 24-hour waiting period required before officially classifying an individual as a missing person. While waiting for the other officers to arrive, the sheriff and Robert Smith retraced Sherry's steps, careful not to destroy any possible evidence. But the naked eye search yielded nothing. They had to wait for more equipment and expertise. Within minutes, officers from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, arrived at the Smith home. Investigators combed the scene, looking for tire tracks, foot impressions, or fingerprints. They found nothing. Knowing the next few hours were critical, the authorities assembled a task force and organized a massive ground search. The possibility of an abduction prompted a swift response. Crimes like this simply did not happen. Surrounding counties sent every available officer to help. Word of Sherry's disappearance spread quickly through the close-knit community of Lexington. Hundreds of local residents offered to participate in the search. Still, they found no trace of the young woman. Though there was no direct evidence that a federal crime had been committed, state investigators called on the expertise of the FBI. They wanted the Bureau to unofficially advise in the search and to assist in the investigation. Special Agent John Vollmer from the FBI's Columbia office was dispatched to the Smiths' house the next morning. The disappearance had even baffled the experts.
She was nowhere to be found. And she was not from a type of family background where that would readily indicate she'd run off with somebody. She was from a very stable, good family background, and they immediately thought obviously something had happened to her. But we had no idea at that point what.
The search urgently continued, with hundreds of volunteers and officers working around the clock. It was a daunting task. The heat and terrain hindered the hunt.
When you're talking about looking in a county of 500 square miles, it's almost like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's extremely difficult because you don't know where to begin and where to go.
2 long, hot days of searching passed, and still there was no sign of Sherry. It grew more and more likely that this was an abduction. Horrified that a crime like this could happen in their town, the residents of Lexington were gripped by fear. Children were not seen without their parents. No one went anywhere alone. With every hour that passed, investigators hoped there was still enough time to find Sherry unharmed. On June 3rd, 3 days after Sherry Faye's disappearance, at about 2:30 in the morning, a call disturbed the Smiths' restless sleep. Robert answered the phone. A voice he did not recognize asked for his wife, Hilda.
Hello?
The caller claimed to be Sherry's abductor.
Yes.
The captor apologized for taking Sherry and insisted that she would eventually be returned. He made clear this was not a ransom call. He told Hilda that she would receive a letter in the mail later that day.
Just tell us what you want.
He promised he'd call back and hung up.
He hung up.
Though a phone tap had been set up earlier, the call was too short to get a trace. SLED officers who were at the Smith home called Agent Vollmer immediately.
It really was unclear whether she was alive or dead. The caller was indicating that she was alive, that he would see that she was returned safely. And I think at that point everyone was hopeful that he was truthful and that in fact she was not dead and would be returned to her home and family.
A letter, hopefully containing clues to Sherry's whereabouts, would be a welcome break. But first they had to find out if the letter, promised by the caller, really did exist. Not wasting any time, they woke the town's postmaster and ordered him to open the post office before daybreak. Then they went to work, sifting letter by letter through the piles of outgoing mail.
Long envelope, something similar to this.
After a half hour, the postmaster found an envelope addressed to the Smiths. Carefully, they slipped it into an evidence bag and sent it to the SLED forensic labs for analysis. Inside the envelope, examiners found a 2-page letter written on yellow legal paper. Their excitement melted into horror as they began reading the letter. It was entitled, Last Will and Testament. It began, I love you, Mommy, Daddy, Robert, Dawn, and Richard, and everyone else, and all other friends and relatives. My thoughts will always be with and in you. Casket closed. I am sorry if I ever disappointed you in any way. I only wanted to make you proud of me, because I have always been proud of my family. The letter ended with, all my love, always, Sharon, Sherry Faye, Smith. With the help of the Smith family, investigators confirmed that the handwriting was Sherry's. Lab examiners began the painstaking task of analyzing the letter. Searching for prints, hairs, fibers, and other clues would take weeks. While investigators hoped the document might provide other valuable leads, they were alarmed by the letter's content.
We were shocked. We were concerned for her well-being. There were several phrases in the letter that she refers to. One would be casket closed. Is, you know, why would a child make a statement, casket closed?
Sherry's fate was unclear. The abductor had all the answers. He had promised to call again. Until he did, the Smith family clung desperately to hope. Just days after Sherry Faye's disappearance, her abductor had called to taunt the family. Since then, agents and detectives set up a voice recorder in addition to the tap already on the Smith phone. Having the abductor's voice on tape would be invaluable. If the suspect called again, they would be ready. The wait was excruciating. At 8 o'clock on the evening of June 3rd, the phone rang.
Go ahead and answer it. Try to stay on the phone as long as possible.
Hello?
It was the voice from the night before. He spoke to Hilda.
Did you receive the letter today?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you know now that this is not a hoax call.
Yes, I know that.
Okay, listen real carefully. I got to hurry. I know these calls are being traced.
Is Sherry with you?
Sherry is now a part of me. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, our souls are one now.
Your souls are one now with Sherry?
Yes, and we're trying to work this out. So please do what we ask.
The trace had been successful.
Go ahead, US 1.
The suspect had called from a phone booth about 20 miles away from the Smith home. A network of sheriff's deputies staking out the area raced to the scene, hoping to catch the caller still on the phone. But when they arrived, all they found was a phone dangling off the hook.
Area, any cars? Give me plates, any cars leaving the immediate area right now.
He had slipped away, leaving nothing behind, not even fingerprints.
They just missed him.
Sherry's older sister, Dawn, recollects the agonizing uncertainty.
I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. I didn't understand that he was a very sick person. I'd never dealt with anybody like that in my life. But I really believed that he was taking care of her and that there had to be some reason for the madness of Sherry being taken.
On the surface, the abductor's phone conversations revealed nothing about Sherry's whereabouts. However, for the FBI, the phone calls offered the first glimpse inside the mind of this twisted predator. It would be up to FBI profilers in the Investigative Support Unit at Quantico, Virginia, to penetrate this criminal's mind. John Douglas pioneered behavioral profiling for the FBI. He and others developed the investigative tool from over 25 years of interviews with convicted killers, arsonists, rapists, and bombers.
Okay, good. When someone asks for a profile, what they're looking for are characteristics, which includes gender, includes age, race, sometimes body typing, educational level, occupational type.
To determine these characteristics, the profiler attempts to think like the killer. He tries to uncover his motivations. Examining every aspect of a crime reveals patterns of behavior. What emerges is a profile describing the type of person the killer will most likely be. After scrutinizing every detail of Sherry's abduction, Douglas generated a 22-point profile of the suspect. He painted the abductor as a white male, in his late 20s to early 30s, with above-average intelligence. He would most likely work as a blue-collar day laborer. Because it sounded as if the killer had electronically distorted his voice, he probably worked in electrical contracting. He would have a prior criminal record. Douglas also suggested he lived locally. The tone and content of his phone calls indicated he was an asocial obsessive compulsive. If the stress of everyday life became too great, he would break down. He would then feel compelled to compensate for his own inadequacies through violent actions.
He's the type of guy that feels like one grain of sand on a beach where there are billions and billions of grains of sand. He feels like nothing. He feels like a nobody. And how can this nobody, this personality, this person who's probably overweight, low self-esteem, unattractive, how can he become a somebody? He'll go after victims that there was no chance that he would ever come in contact with someone like a Sherry Faye Smith. And so for the first time in their life, they can be powerful.
On Wednesday, June 5th, the Smiths received another call. This time, he gave the family directions to where they would find Sherry.
Listen carefully. Take Highway 378 west to traffic circle. Turn left at white frame building. 6 feet beyond, we're waiting. God chose us.
Investigators raced to the location, hoping they might still find her alive. Six days after her mysterious disappearance, investigators found the body of Sherry Faye Smith.
When the Smith family received the call to the location of the body, we went immediately there, and our worst fears came true.
Sherry's body had been laid in the woods of Saluda County, some 17 miles from the home from which she vanished. Her abductor was now wanted for first-degree murder. A week of 100-degree heat had taken its toll. The body's advanced state of decay worked in the killer's favor. The medical examiner could not determine the exact cause and time of death. To John Douglas, the location and condition of the crime scene provided further insight into the suspect's mind.
He had some criminal sophistication, because I believe what he did is he waited for her to now go into advanced stages of decomposition, which would make it more difficult for law enforcement to determine cause and method of death in this state of decomposition.
The confirmation of Sherry's murder devastated the Lexington community. That Saturday, a crowd of 1,000 mourners attended a funeral service at the town's First Baptist Church. That evening, following Sherry's funeral, the killer could not resist inflicting more torment.
Well, may I speak to Mrs. Smith?
Sherry's Aunt Beverly answered the phone.
I want to speak to Dawn.
I'm sorry, she's not available either.
Beverly stalled him, hoping to gain valuable time for the phone trace.
Yeah, I have to go then if I can't talk to her.
But the suspect threatened to hang up if he couldn't immediately speak to Dawn.
Hello?
This thing got out of hand, and all I wanted to do was make love to Dawn. I've been watching her for a couple of weeks.
To who?
To Sherry. Dawn, I hope you and your family forgive me for this.
When you killed Sherry, was she at peace? She wasn't afraid or anything?
She was not. She was at peace. She knew that God was with her, and she was going to become an angel.
Overwhelmed with grief, Sherry's mother insisted on talking to her daughter's murderer.
Did you tell her you were going to kill her?
Yes, I did, and I gave her the choice, and she picked suffocation.
My God, how could you?
It did not escape the attention of the FBI and local investigators that the killer had mistakenly used Dawn's name when he spoke of Sherry. They braced themselves for the possibility that this killer might be turning his murderous obsession towards Dawn. But the suspect would make only one more call before falling ominously silent. Though he wasn't talking, they knew he was still out there, terrifying a community. And the profile predicted that if he killed once, he would kill again. In June 1985, FBI investigators continued to hunt the kidnapper and killer of 17-year-old Sherry Smith. While investigators focused on the Smith murder, the elusive predator pursued other plans. On Friday, June 14th, 2 weeks after Sherry's abduction, a man grabbed Deborah May Helmick from her front yard in Richland County as she played with her brother. She was just 9 years old. The child's screaming alerted a neighbor. But the woman was not fast enough. The abductor managed to slip away in broad daylight. Helmick's neighbor could only provide vague information. However, the general description of the suspect and his method appeared eerily similar to the man the FBI wanted for the murder of Sherry. Richland County sheriffs immediately contacted the task force in nearby Lexington.
Within moments of that abduction, we were aware of it and began to focus on that case also. We were pretty much in our minds, I think that everybody knew these two cases were connected.
For John Douglas, the case took on an even greater sense of urgency. Deborah May Helmick's fate seemed almost certain.
once they get the urge, they're out looking for the preferential victim, but if they cannot find the victim of choice, they will go after whoever is available. And that was the case here with Deborah May Helmick.
News of the second abduction brought Douglas down from Quantico, Virginia to South Carolina. The FBI hoped they could find 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick before her young life was cut short. In the Smith case, the killer's phone calls had been a critical link for the investigators. It had been nearly a week since Deborah's disappearance, and they hadn't heard from him. To get him to call, Douglas devised a plan. With the help of the local media, he would set a trap.
And the way that
One key element of the plan placed Dawn Smith in jeopardy. Douglas had to ask the Smiths to put their other daughter at risk to catch Sherry's killer and hopefully find young Deborah. Dawn agreed.
A lot of times people thought we were twins. We looked a lot alike, and so they came up with this plan that if I were to answer the phone, maybe he would turn that fascination from Sherry to me. And if I could keep him on the phone talking long enough about Sherry, about himself, about anything to keep him on the phone, then they could trace the call and catch him.
Allow him to...
Douglas's strategy centered around a memorial service for Sherry. Investigators promoted the service in the local press. The agents hoped the attention to his first victim would rekindle the killer's fascination with Dawn. Douglas needed something else to bait the trap, a personal item from Sherry's room. Based on experience, Douglas knew that sexual predators are often attracted to personal items of their victims.
She likes koalas.
They want mementos that they can keep, even display as trophies. He noticed the koala bear. It was the mascot of the university she planned to attend in the fall.
This is going to work perfectly.
The day of the memorial service, plainclothed agents swarmed the grounds, hoping their suspect would visit the cemetery. As the family's minister delivered a eulogy, Dawn and her parents huddled close. Though Dawn had willingly volunteered to lure the killer to the trap, the danger it presented weighed on everyone's mind. There was no telling what the suspect might do.
The security around Dawn was heightened. We were extremely concerned about Dawn becoming a victim.
Then, as planned, Dawn placed some flowers and the koala bear on her sister's grave. Now all that was left to do was wait. Using Douglas's profile, FBI agents coached Dawn on how to handle the suspect when he called.
I was told to never be threatening, to never be harsh, to be real understanding and sympathetic and compassionate, and I was with him. And I think he liked that because he felt like he was very much in charge, which is something that he thrived on.
Several calls came to the Smith home following the memorial service. Not knowing if it was Sherry's killer, Dawn had to answer every one. Shortly after midnight, the phone at the Smith house rang again.
Hello? I would like to talk to Dawn Smith from Sherry. Will you take the call?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
As Douglas had hoped, the culprit took the bait. And as anticipated, the killer had turned his focus to Dawn.
You can't be protected all the time.
He made it clear to her that she was going to be his next victim.
You know, God wants you to join Cherry Bay. It's just a matter of time. This month.
Despite the threat, Dawn kept him on the line, enduring abuse from the man who murdered her sister, while officials traced the origin of the call.
Richland County?
Yeah, okay, listen carefully. Go one north.
Then, before hanging up, the killer offered directions.
Turn right. Deborah May
day is waiting. God forgive us all.
Special Agent John Vollmer feared that the killer would not stop there.
Once he called about Deborah Helmick, then you're leading into the possibility that you now are dealing with a possible serial killer who has killed now at least 2, you suspect, maybe others before, and may continue to kill others.
Despite Douglas's success at getting the suspect to call, no one had anticipated just how far away the killer would go to avoid detection. Tracing the call from outside the area took additional time. Again, the suspect left the phone booth moments before the authorities could reach him.
We were very, very close to catching him on a number of occasions, and it's almost as if he sensed this and began to move further in making his phone call.
Other investigators followed the caller's directions. There, they found 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick murdered. The gamble had failed. With every missed opportunity, the probability of more victims increased. And now, Dawn was the most likely target. Investigators feared the killer would make an attempt to abduct her. An elusive serial killer had already killed 2 girls around Lexington, South Carolina. The slim amount of evidence frustrated FBI investigators as well as local law enforcement. But the forensic analysis was about to generate the biggest break in the investigation. The last will and testament of Sherry Smith was examined by Gail Heath, director of the questioned document section of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Labs. Using an ESDA machine, Heath hoped to find hard evidence. The ESDA, an acronym for Electrostatic Detection Apparatus, can pick up images that are invisible to the naked eye. It works on the opposite principle of a printing press. Instead of coating raised letters with ink to create an image, the ESDA fills in the indentations on the document in question with graphite. When an imaging film similar to Saran wrap is pulled tight over the document, a readable image comes through. After hours of examining the document, Heath found indented writing. It appeared to be a phone number and a name.
The particular name and phone number in question, we were able to bring up the entire area code, the first 3 numbers of the prefix, the next 2 numbers, the 3rd number we were unsure of, and then we had the 4th number.
The name on the pad was Joe. From the area code, investigators determined the number was from Alabama. To fill in the missing digit, investigators called every combination of the phone number until they reached a party who had the same name as the one found on the legal pad. They finally made a match. The number belonged to a man named Joe Shepard. Investigators scrutinized his phone records. They found that he had received a call from an address just outside of Lexington in Lake Murray, South Carolina. Either of these addresses could belong to the killer. Armed with the FBI profile, local police visited the Alabama address.
How you doing? You Mr. Shepard?
They met Joe Shepard. He didn't match the killer's profile. Even though he was not a suspect, he could still be an important link to the killer. Police had to find out the connection between him and the Lake Murray, South Carolina phone call. Shepard explained it came from his parents' home. South Carolina officers verified that the address belonged to Joe Shepard's parents, Ellis and Sharon Shepard. Investigators went to the Lake Murray address to question the residents. The house was just 2 miles from where police found the body of 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick.
10-4.
They learned that Ellis worked as an electrician in home construction. It was a profession the FBI profile predicted. As the officers knocked on the door, a car pulled into the driveway. When investigators saw the Shepherds, they immediately felt they had hit another dead end. Besides Ellis Shepard's profession, nothing else seemed to fit the profile. They questioned them anyway. The Shepherds told them that they had recently returned from a 6-week trip. The officers casually asked if the couple knew about the Smith and Helmick murders. With every question, the police noticed Mrs. Shepard becoming more concerned. The Shepherds were beginning to suspect their house sitter, Larry Jean Bell. As they described Bell, elements of the profile fell into place. He was a white male, in his 30s, who lived with his parents. He sometimes assisted Ellis in home construction. Just days earlier, when the Shepherds returned from the vacation, Bell had picked them up from the airport. He talked to the Shepherds at length about the cases. He was closely following the news of the murders. It was more evidence of a meticulous mind and behavior consistent with the profile.
They said that he had saved the newspaper articles, told them all about the case in great detail from the airport back to their residence. Again, it was uncanny how much this profile was on track.
The detectives asked if they could see the inside of the house. Suspecting the killer had used a weapon to force Sherry Smith into the car, they asked Ellis Shepard if he owned a gun. Shepard led them to a drawer where he kept his revolver.
Last time I used this gun.
To his surprise, the gun was gone.
Got a good idea.
The officers asked the couple to accompany them to the precinct. They wanted the Shepherds to listen to recordings of the killer's calls to the Smith family. The investigators needed to know if the voice on the recordings belonged to their house sitter.
For a couple of months, and then they'd find out I'm sane, and then I'd get tried and get sent to electric chair, put in prison the rest of my life. I'm not going to stay in prison the rest of my life.
Though the caller may have electronically altered his voice, to the Shepherds, it was clear that the man on the tape was their house sitter, Larry Jean Bell.
I filled in all the holes and everything.
We were all extremely elated. We could not show any emotion, but we knew that we had the case at that point. We had our man.
But anyway.
The Shepherds told the police that they expected Bell to return to their home at 7:30 the next morning for work.
We're going to have a Detective Perry.
Investigators staked out Bell's residence. This time, there was no way he could elude capture. Larry Jean Bell headed down the highway to the Shepherds. He failed to notice the unmarked police car following behind him. The officers radioed to another car waiting to cut him off at the approaching intersection. June 26, 1985, at 7:19 a.m., investigators finally trapped the elusive Larry Jean Bell. This time, it was the investigators who were one step ahead. Bell was arrested without resistance and taken to the precinct for questioning. With Bell now in custody, investigators still needed to build an airtight case to make sure he would never be free to kill again. Combining hard forensic evidence with the FBI profile, South Carolina police arrested Larry Gene Bell on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. But now they had to prove beyond any doubt that he was indeed the killer of Sherry Smith and Deborah Mae Hellman. It was up to Lexington County Solicitor Donald Myers to make the case. A career prosecutor, Myers was determined to convict the killer who had so horrifically taunted his victim's family.
I did not like Larry Gene Bell even before I knew him. And I knew that this was probably the most publicized case that we would ever had. The most publicized in South Carolina up to that time. And I pretty much committed myself to go after him with everything I had.
Though there was powerful evidence against Bell, it was only circumstantial. Still, in the state of South Carolina, a confession could guarantee the maximum sentence. Myers needed to make sure that Bell would never be able to take another life. He wanted a confession. Again, they called on the FBI to help. They recommended setting up an interrogation room that would elicit a self-incriminating statement.
For instance, a map showing where the phone calls were made, some pictures of the victim so that he's aware as he looks about the room to remind him of the victim. You might have fingerprint cards on the table. You might have notebooks or file cabinets that would have his name on them, all to make him think you obviously have narrowed in on him, you've got the goods on him, he might as well go ahead and give it up.
While the officers prepared to question Bell, other detectives secured a search warrant for the Shepherd's house. For the next 12 hours, the forensic team combed every square inch of the home, looking for anything that would firmly connect Bell to the crimes. As the profile predicted, the house was in perfect order. It was meticulously cleaned, vacuumed, and dusted, particularly in the room where Larry Gene Bell had been staying. But beneath the orderly exterior, the team uncovered evidence of his deviance. The bed's pristine sheets concealed a thin, dirty mattress, and beneath that lay a porn magazine and a handgun that matched the description of Mr. Shepherd's missing .38. Despite the freshly vacuumed carpets, an investigator retrieved a blonde hair in the space where a vacuum cleaner wouldn't reach. A lab would match the strand to Sherry Smith.
Mr. Bell, how are you this afternoon?
While the investigators continued the search for evidence at the Shepherd's home, detectives at the interrogation carried out the FBI's strategy. First, they made sure Bell was comfortable. As advised by Douglas, they spoke to the suspect in a non-threatening way. They pretended to empathize with him, to understand his pain, in order to pry him open. They walked their suspect through the growing mound of evidence condemning him. At every chance, they reminded him of the victims. Bell denied everything. However, he did make a curious request. He wanted to meet Dawn and Hilda Smith. Hoping the mother and sister of his first victim might stir a confession, the Smiths agreed. Hilda and Dawn tried to mentally prepare themselves. Finally, they stepped into the room and came face to face with Sherry's killer.
He began to mumble and he began to speak about how he was sorry that the person sitting in that chair couldn't have been the one that had done this. But another Larry Bell could have been the one. He really didn't make a lot of sense. And so I remember sitting there, I remember looking at him, I remember listening to him, and I really just felt disgust. That I knew this was the man, and he wasn't even man enough to say, I did it, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make excuses. But my mom said the most incredible thing to him. She said, I know you're the man that killed my daughter, and I can honestly say that I don't hate you. And he got teary.
But Bell's emotional break went only to the point of tears. He never made the confession authorities wanted. After weeks of compiling evidence, Myers and the investigators began to piece together the sequence of events of May 31st, 1985. Bell noticed Sherry Smith after dropping his mother off at a doctor's appointment. Something about the young woman triggered his lecherous cravings. As she left the parking lot, Bell followed. His desire shattered what little restraint he possessed. He never let her out of his sight. Sherry did not notice the car following her down the road. She pulled into the driveway and stopped at the mailbox. Bell wasted no time.
Tell me the way to...
He had taken Sherry completely by surprise.
Come on, you're going with me!
He brought Sherry to the shepherd's house on Lake Murray. Bell then canceled dinner with friends. He told them he wanted to stay at the shepherd's and watch a baseball game. He had already tied Sherry to the bed. The evidence showed that Sherry had been raped. Before killing her, Bell coerced Sherry to write her last will and testament. "12 hours after she disappeared, he covered her mouth with duct tape and suffocated her. Investigators believed that she was dead by 4:58 a.m., the time Bell claimed that their souls became one. It took less than 1 hour for 12 South Carolinians to find Bell guilty of first-degree murder. Myers prosecuted Bell in a separate trial for the murder of 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick. He was found guilty a second time. With Bell's conviction, the Smith family could begin to rebuild their lives.
There was a sense of relief that, okay, now he can't do this to me, he can't do this to anybody else, and he will be put away.
Larry Gene Bell paid the ultimate price for his sadistic crimes. On October 4th, 1996, he was put to death in South Carolina's electric chair. Though the loss of Sherry Smith and Deborah May Helmick will always be felt, life in Lexington has slowly returned to normal. With skill and determination, the South Carolina law enforcement community and the FBI brought closure to a grieving town by ending the deadly game of cat and mouse. A nightmare strikes, ripping a Dallas family apart. A father makes a desperate escape, while his wife and child are taken by a drug dealer. FBI agents race against time to find the hostages and their abductor. A trail of bodies litters the path to Gino Kamacho.
A mother and child are kidnapped. A bystander is murdered. Violence such as this shattered a quiet Texas neighborhood and exposed a drug cartel that flourished where it was least expected. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. FBI field agents work to penetrate the secretive drug underworld, expose those involved, and crush the cartel.
In the spring of 1988, narcotics had infiltrated the working-class communities of Dallas, Texas. A rise in robberies and break-ins followed the drug trade. Some families retreated from the higher crime areas to the neighborhood of Pleasant Grove. Sam Wright, his 3-year-old son Andre, and his wife Evelyn Banks found refuge among the porch-lined streets. Here, residents looked out for one another. Then, early on May 20th, 1988, a gunshot shattered the morning silence. To the shock of one onlooker, 4 armed men emerged from the Wright house, dragging the family to a car. Sam Wright managed to break free from the abductors and escaped. The neighbor who witnessed the incident ran to alert the authorities, while Wright dashed behind houses to avoid the gang. But help could not arrive before the gang stuffed Wright's family into the car and disappeared. Strangely, detectives had still not heard from Wright, and the mystery of the morning's events deepened as detectives entered. Inside, the kidnapping investigation expanded to include a murder investigation as well. The police found the body of a young man lying face down in a pool of blood. A driver's license identified the victim as 25-year-old David Wilburn. Investigators were thorough and collected anything that seemed promising. But there was little evidence to collect. They also dusted for fingerprints, but retrieved none foreign to the residence. Detectives spoke to the neighbor who called 911, hoping she could provide some answers. The interview revealed that Wilburn, the dead man found at the scene, was Sam Wright's nephew. But she didn't know why anyone would want Wilburn executed. Detectives also learned that the Latino man who drove the Lincoln had visited Sam Wright on previous occasions. But no one recognized the others. For investigators, larger questions remained. Where was Sam Wright? And why hadn't he contacted authorities about his family's abduction? Just one disturbing fact was clear. A mother and her 3-year-old son were in the hands of killers. Given the urgency, the Dallas police called in the FBI. Special Agent Jose Figueroa was assigned to the case.
Every time we receive information about kidnappings, that's a priority case in our standards, especially when a kid is involved. And we don't wait 24 hours to respond to a kidnapping.
Figueroa began by searching for Sam Wright, the man who had escaped from the gang. The FBI learned that Wright was a fugitive, on the run for 3 years after fleeing a drug conviction. This explained why Wright, the distraught father, had kept on running and not turned to the police. But the FBI agents needed him. If they were going to move forward and help the wife and child, they had to talk to Wright. Suspecting that Wright was hiding in the area, agents canvassed the Pleasant Grove neighborhood, talking to neighbors.
That's what we did at the beginning. We inundated the whole area with our business cards and interview everybody, just asking for somebody to get in touch with Sam Wright for him to contact the FBI office.
As hoped, one of Figueroa's business cards found its way into Wright's hands. The panic-stricken father risked capture by calling the FBI. He asked for the only person who could help his family, Agent Figueroa. Tass Bailey worked with Jose Figueroa in the FBI Violent Crimes Unit in Dallas.
Sam told Jose that the individual who committed this offense was a guy named Gino, and that was all that Sam knew him by, was Gino, but that he had been arrested several months before by the Mesquite Police Department for a murder committed down in the valley, the Rio Grande Valley.
Sam Wright refused to come to the FBI office, but promised to call again. Until then, the agents had one lead: the name Gino.
We went out to the Mesquite Police Department and met with Captain Larry Sprague. Larry told us, he said, "Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about Gino Kamacho."
33-year-old Gino Kamacho was a known drug runner whose large shipments of marijuana were distributed and protected by a small gang of thugs. He was also known to have a girlfriend named Wanda Jackson. On Sunday, May 22nd, just 2 days after the abduction, agents tracked down Wanda Jackson. They asked her about Gino Camacho's whereabouts, but she denied having any knowledge of where the suspect was. She claimed that she hadn't seen Gino in weeks. The agents left with the suspicion that she was lying. If the FBI had Wright in custody, perhaps they could have negotiated a deal with Wanda as a go-between, letting Kamacho believe he would be paid for his hostages. But the agents lacked the leverage that may have encouraged her to work with them. They needed to bring in Sam Wright. When Wright called the next day, they were ready with a tap and trace on the phone.
Okay.
An arrest team had already been dispatched to the downtown area.
What does he look like? You know his name?
When the payphone address came through, it was radioed to the field. The agents found Wright still using the phone, but they did not move in immediately. Though desperate to find his family, Sam Wright was a convicted drug dealer, a fugitive from the law. The FBI didn't know how far he might go to avoid capture. Agents spotted one man waiting in the car for the fugitive. Wright could have had others posted nearby. The agents wanted to reduce the risk of violent resistance by Wright and any of his associates.
Okay, here we go.
When they were confident that Wright and his driver had no other accomplices, the agents struck.
FBI, out of the car!
Wright was arrested without incident on his outstanding warrant and taken into custody. Agents Bailey and Figueroa began the interrogation of the captured fugitive.
What's your tie-in with Gino?
I don't have a
Wright described the events of May 20th, 1988. It was any family's worst nightmare. On that day, Wright kept his young son, Andre, entertained. His wife, Evelyn, sat alone downstairs. They were in mourning. Wright's mother had recently passed away in Louisiana. He was expecting his nephew, David Wilburn, to arrive shortly and drive the family to the funeral. Wright watched for Wilburn's arrival since visitors did not have access to the front door. As a fugitive, Wright had installed burglar bars around the porch, thinking it would protect his family, both from the law and from his violent associates. But the bars could not withstand Gino Camacho's anger. Without warning, 4 men burst into the house brandishing automatic weapons. Sam Wright's past had caught up with him. The one he knew as Gino screamed that he wanted money that was owed him. Wright swore he didn't have it and pleaded for mercy. Gino's rage only escalated. At that moment, Wright's nephew, David Wilburn, arrived. He could not have come at a worse time. Though he was a large man, Gino's men quickly subdued him. Wright described his nephew as a gentle soul who never hurt anyone. Gino yelled that he meant business. To prove his point, he placed the muzzle of a .357 revolver to the back of Wilburn's head. A second later, a single shot brought instant death. Wright watched helplessly as the lifeless body of his nephew collapsed a few feet away. Sam Wright desperately wanted to help authorities, but he swore he didn't have any more information that could assist the investigators in locating his family. While Wright remained in custody, the clock continued ticking for his wife and son. To expedite leads, Dallas police and the FBI orchestrated a media campaign. Area newspapers and television stations featured pictures of Camacho's face. The authorities requested that citizens come forward with any information as to the suspect's whereabouts. This campaign yielded a tip from an unsavory source, another drug dealer. David Munoz, a small-time dealer, called the FBI and was connected to Agent Bailey. Munoz claimed that he recognized the kidnapper in a television news story. He said he had information that might be useful to the investigation.
You call my office?
Munoz
What do
arranged
you
to
want?
meet Bailey in his Dallas motel late at night. He told Bailey that he knew who Camacho's accomplices were. He even offered to turn Kamacho over to the FBI as part of an unorthodox deal.
I got something you want.
What Munoz planned on doing was kind of taking over the collection of Camacho's drug debts and business dealings, and wanted us to kind of turn a blind eye towards this. We basically told him no deal.
Because there was only a weak connection to the case, Bailey did not arrest Munoz. Nevertheless, the FBI agent managed to extract one key name from the opportunist, Eddie Blaine Cummings. On the street, Cummings was known as Fast Eddie. A background check revealed he had a criminal record and had spent time in jail with Gino Kamacho. Cummings was currently on parole for possession of illegal weapons. Special Agent Figueroa now had two names, Gino Kamacho and Fast Eddie, as he canvassed area nightclubs. Armed with photos of Kamacho and Fast Eddie, Figueroa found a bar patron who had recently seen the pair come in. The patron had heard Fast Eddie talk about a lunch appointment the next day up in Lawton, Oklahoma, a 3-hour drive northwest of Dallas. An arrest team assembled in the parking lot of the Oklahoma restaurant on the morning of August 12, 1988. The plan was to wait until Fast Eddie exited the crowded restaurant to isolate him from bystanders. Investigators were poised to strike. Fast Eddie was their closest link to Kamacho so far. When the door opened, the arrest team descended, nabbing Fast Eddie before he could flee. One associate of Camacho's gang was now in custody. Agents hoped Fast Eddie could lead them closer to the missing mother and son. In the summer of 1988, Dallas FBI agents searched for a missing mother and child, abducted at gunpoint by a drug gang. Fast Eddie, an associate of the gang, was now in custody. Under interrogation, Fast Eddie denied having anything to do with the kidnapping in Dallas.
Come on, Eddie, the kidnapping at the right house.
But eventually, he did tell them what he knew of the crime.
This was the first time we had actually learned who all was involved and the names of the individuals the morning of the abduction.
Fast Eddie fingered Kamacho and 2 other gang members, Juan Jackson and David Cook. He and David Cook had grown up together in Stephenville, Texas, a 2-hour drive from Dallas. As far as Fast Eddie knew, Cook was probably back in their hometown. Bailey and Figueroa needed to get Cook, trusting that the lead might take them one step closer to Kamacho and the missing mother and child. They sought a contact in Stephenville and found the name of Detective Don Miller. On August 15th, 1988, Detective Don Miller called back Agent Bailey. Miller had found the suspect working at his family's convenience store. The detective would hold him until the agents arrived.
You're waiting on you.
Miller warned Cook that if he knew something, it would be best to cooperate with the FBI.
Yeah, you boys.
One member of the gang that kidnapped Evelyn and Andre Banks was now in custody. The FBI was a step closer to Kamacho and the missing pair. Agents rushed to Stephenville, hoping David Cook may lead them to Kamacho and his hostages before time ran out for the mother and son.
A couple of months ago.
He had decided to help investigators with the case in the hopes of a lighter sentence. Over 2 days of interrogation, Cook detailed his version of the events of May 20th, 1988. On the morning of the assault, Kamacho picked up Cook and 2 more associates. He said they were going to collect a debt. Kamacho had given Sam Wright $20,000 worth of marijuana to deal, but Wright had claimed it was stolen. Kamacho swore he'd get his money back. Gang member Juan Jackson opened up a bag and started passing out guns. The arsenal included submachine guns and the .357 pistol. Kamacho sent another gang member, Larry Merrill, around back to cut the phone line. No one was going to call for help. Juan Jackson cut through the padlocked burglar bars, while David Cook and Kamacho kept watch. They burst in the front door and found Evelyn Banks in the living room. Kamacho had his men sweep the house, guns drawn.
Where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my 20 grand? Downstairs. Move. I want my money. I want it now. I'm not leaving this house without it. I'm not leaving here without my money. You understand me?
The gang corralled the terrified family into the living room as Camacho's fury rose. He said that if the family didn't cooperate, they would die.
Kamacho told him to put the baby on the sofa next to his mother, and that if the baby moved or caused any problems, to shoot him. Gino started screaming how they had ripped him off, how they had not treated him with respect, and he wanted his money and he wanted it now.
Amid all the shouting, there came a knock at the door. The assailants' first thought was that the neighbors had summoned the police. Kamacho and Jackson moved into position, prepared to fire on the police they thought were on the other side of the door.
Come in!
When David Wilburn walked through the front door, he was surrounded by the armed gang. The gunmen threw him to the ground without a struggle. Kamacho ordered Jackson to shoot him. But when he hesitated, Kamacho turned to Cook. But when Cook refused, Kamacho grabbed the gun from his hand and showed everyone just how serious he was. Kamacho yelled that no one was going to show him disrespect anymore.
Grabbed my gun and he just blew the guy away.
Under intense questioning, Cook never wavered on the facts, including that Kamacho was the shooter. His story matched Sam Wright's version. After they left the house, Kamacho remained furious that Wright had escaped. But the gang didn't give chase. They knew the police would soon be summoned in force to the Pleasant Grove neighborhood. Instead, Kamacho ordered them all to Cook's apartment, where he could decide their next move. Kamacho figured they could lay low there with the hostages. Paul Macaluso was the assistant U.S. attorney who tracked the case.
They were concerned about damage control. They had 2 witnesses to a murder, to a capital murder, and what to do about them.
Cook told agents that a new gang member, Spencer Stanley, was called to the apartment to guard the hostages while he and Kamacho were away dealing drugs at a nearby hotel. Juan Jackson didn't stay much longer. Fearing the heat from the authorities, he cleaned the guns, took some getaway cash, and left the gang for good. While Stanley kept watch over the hostages, Cook and Kamacho drove to the hotel to make the drug deal. There, just 2 days after the abduction, Kamacho got a call from his girlfriend, Wanda Jackson. She had a cryptic message for him.
Hey, your big brother was just here? Yeah.
Big Brother, of course, referring to the federal authorities, the FBI, had been to the house.
The same girlfriend that had sworn to the FBI that she had no idea of Camacho's whereabouts reached him moments after the agents left her.
In trouble. I don't know how.
Her warning gave the gang a head start on the pursuing agents. Kamacho returned to Cook's apartment. He told Evelyn that he wasn't angry with her, only with her husband over the money.
I'm not after you.
He said he would release her and Andre if she promised not to go to the authorities.
Man owed me the money.
She agreed.
Throw you around the way I did.
With that pledge, Kamacho said he would take them to a private airstrip in Oklahoma for a flight to California.
Get us all out of here to safety.
There they would remain safe until Kamacho settled up with Wright. At the end of a grueling interrogation session, Cook told agents that Evelyn and Andre never made it to California. There was no plane for them to board. Cook knew where they were left, across the Texas state line, near Ardmore, Oklahoma.
Turn around, hands right here.
In August of 1988, special agents from Dallas's Violent Crimes Unit had arrested one member of a Texas gang responsible for one murder and the abduction of a mother and child. While in custody, Cook pointed special agents Jose Figueroa and Tass Bailey north to Oklahoma. It was the next stepping stone towards their ultimate goal: finding Evelyn and Andre Banks and their abductor, Gino Kamacho. According to Cook, Kamacho had driven Evelyn and Andre Banks to a remote area across state lines. The gang leader had promised to fly the mother and child to her relatives in California from an airstrip that was concealed behind the trees. They pulled the car off the side of the road and together headed into the woods. Spencer Stanley led the way, carrying 3-year-old Andre. In a few hours, she thought she would be on the West Coast, where she would remain until her husband paid the drug debt he owed Kamacho. But as they walked deeper into the woods, Evelyn found no clearing for a plane to land.
No!
Then she saw the hole.
No! No!
In an instant, she realized what it meant. She fainted from the shock. There was no airstrip, no flight to freedom. She and her son had been brought here to die. Spencer Stanley dropped her child into the open grave. Kamacho fired 4 times. Then they threw Evelyn in on top of her son and shot her as well. Evelyn Banks and her 3-year-old son Andre died on May 23, 1988. This was the grisly scene that David Cook told agents he was leading them to. The agents had just about reached their frustration point when Cook at last recognized the area. The search for Kamacho's victims began in the punishing heat of late summer. The federal kidnapping case had escalated into a homicide case as well. Kamacho had now killed 3 people. But if the agents wanted to prove their case against the killer, they had to find the bodies. To pinpoint the burial site, the agents began a line search through the trees.
And as we walked in behind those cedar trees, you could see a depression in the ground where someone had dug. All the sod had been torn off.
When investigators reached the site, 3 months had passed since the murders. They began the painstaking excavation. They removed small loads and sifted through the dirt, careful not to miss or destroy any evidence. Near the surface, agents found shell casings from a .380 caliber weapon.
Yeah, somebody got a bag?
That fit with Cook's account that Kamacho had fired a small, semi-automatic pistol.
Right there.
The digging continued at a painfully slow
Looks like
pace.
they've all been here about the same.
You got to remember, this is the end of August. It was about 95 degrees, about 90% humidity. We were in that area of the trees, so there was no air movement. I mean, we were just stuck in there. We'd been digging for about 2 hours.
Then one of the agents struck something hard. It sounded hollow. Another blow broke through the shell-like crust. A foul stench suddenly overwhelmed the agents.
And the god-awful smell of decaying human body came out of the hole, and we both jumped out of the hole and went over in the bushes and got sick, and then had to go back into it again.
Before burying Evelyn and Andre, Kamacho and his men covered the bodies with cat litter to help hide the odor. But the clay in the cat litter absorbed moisture from the bodies, then hardened into an airtight shell, reducing the rate of decomposition and preserving the bodies for autopsy. Despite the nauseating stench, the agents pressed on. They put Vicks Vapor Rub under their noses to suppress the odor and continued working. They were determined to construct an impenetrable case against Kamacho and his gang. Cook then led agents to nearby Lake Texoma, where he said the gang had disposed of the weapons after the killing. A dive team from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation combed the lake bottom. They came up with more casings from the .380. And then they found the handgun. The physical evidence against Gino Kamacho was now solid, corroborating eyewitness testimony. The federal agents were confident they could secure a conviction on 2 counts of kidnapping and 3 of murder. But Kamacho remained at large, and agents learned he had killed again. Cook told the FBI he could lead them to that body as well. In late August of 1988, the FBI in Dallas had captured David Cook, a member of a violent Texas drug gang. The gang's leader, Gino Kamacho, wanted for kidnapping and 3 murders, was still at large. Cook was cooperating with agents in the hunt for Kamacho. He had led investigators to the burial site of Camacho's most recent murder victims. But during the 2-day trip to recover the bodies of Evelyn and Andre Banks in Oklahoma, Cook surprised agents with another tale of Camacho's terror. This time, Kamacho had released his rage on a woman named Pamela Miller. Agents now turned their focus to her whereabouts. Agents learned that Pam Miller worked as an exotic dancer in a Dallas strip club. She met Kamacho and started hanging out with his gang. Cook told agents that he and Miller joined Kamacho one night in June of 1988.
So you're all set and still looking for.
It had been just 3 weeks since Camacho had shot and killed 3 people, but he had risked a trip to Dallas to arrange another drug deal.
Only about 5 minutes, all right.
The buyer showed up at a hotel bar and began negotiating.
take care of her. Yeah.
But Pam interrupted the transaction.
Pam Miller recognized the purchaser as somebody who came into the club where she had danced, and she recognized him, and she told him so. I know you, you came into the club. Well, not surprisingly, this had a chilling effect on the transaction.
Sure.
The buyer skipped out. The deal was dead.
You have any idea what you just did?
I know him from where I dance at.
You do?
Camacho became furious at Pam for messing up the drug deal, and Cook and Pam and Camacho walked out of the hotel. As soon as they got in the car, Camacho started beating Pamela. Pamela then made some comments to Camacho attacking his manhood, which only infuriated him more.
Yes. Huh? Yes, you did. You lost me.
As they drove, Camacho's rage boiled over. Cook and Stanley had seen the results of his temper before. They knew where it could lead. Yet they were too intimidated to speak up. Camacho's brutal beating didn't stop until Miller had lost consciousness.
Stop the car.
Still enraged, Kamacho ordered Cook to stop the car. He dragged Miller onto the road, laid her limp body behind the right rear tire, and yelled for Cook to back up.
Come on, Tito. I don't want... Back the car! Now!
Cook obeyed.
They drove down to Stephenville. They went to an apartment that was rented by David Cook, and they took Pamela's body and put it in a 55-gallon drum, stuck it out on the patio, stuck a bag of trash on top of it so no one would see there was a body in it.
They stayed there for the weekend. Kamacho, Stanley, Cook. They sat around drinking beer and partying until Kamacho decided to dispose of the body.
So we asked David, well, where will we find Pamela's body? And he said, you won't. And we said, why not? He said, well, we chopped her up and put her in a tree mulcher. While I was driving the car, Jose was in the front seat. I looked at Jose, he looked at me, our mouths dropped open, and I almost ran off the highway. I couldn't believe what I just heard.
Cook led FBI agents to the wooded site on the ranch where they had pulverized the body. It seemed impossible that they would find any remains. Not only would the shredder have pulped the body, but it was now some 2 months after the insidious act. It was likely that the hot Texas sun had decayed the remains even further. Despite the odds, agents set out to recover what they could. From Cook's account, the agents figured out the shredder's discharge path. They set up a grid system and began meticulously scouring the scene. The process took hours, but the hard work yielded dividends. From the ground, agents recovered bone shards and tissue. In the tree branches above, they found more tissue, dried by the sun. Each item was bagged and labeled based on its location. The agents also recovered teeth. A check with Pamela Miller's dental records allowed a positive identification of the victim. 23-year-old Pamela Miller had been Camacho's 4th murder in as many weeks. Yet her murderer was still at large, and every day he remained free, Kamacho posed a threat to anyone that crossed his path. But a major break in the case soon followed when the family of Spencer Stanley, the gang member who had helped Kamacho kill 3 victims, contacted the FBI. They tipped the agents off that Stanley was hiding in a trailer park in Huntsville, Alabama. Stanley told investigators that he had thrown the .357 Kamacho used to kill David Wilburn into Lake Ray Hubbard near Dallas. An FBI dive team searched the bottom of the Texas lake. They never found a gun.
I got something.
But they did find a casing from a .357 and several live rounds. The recovered bullets were taken to the FBI's Materials and Devices Unit in Washington, D.C. for neutron activation analysis. Agents hoped that the bullets from Lake Ray Hubbard could be matched to the bullet that killed Camacho's first victim, David Wilburn. Neutron activation analysis is based on the fact that lead bullets are created in batches, and each batch of lead is unique. The FBI examiners needed to prepare the bullets for the test by removing the slugs from the shells, readying them for transportation to a nuclear reactor. Lead samples from each bullet were lowered into the reactor's core. The samples absorbed neutrons and became radioactive. The radioactivity was measured and gave a precise reading of the chemical elements found in the lead, a radioactive signature. Examiners concluded that the signatures from each bullet were identical. The bullets from Lake Ray Hubbard and Wilburn's body had come from the same batch of ammunition. Though the physical evidence against Kamacho continued to build, it didn't put the authorities any closer to locating the fugitive. Through an informant, the FBI learned that Kamacho had escaped to Mexico and was hiding in a small town just south of the Texas border. U.S. authorities sought to have him arrested and extradited. But Mexican authorities were unable to cooperate. They claimed that the town where Kamacho stayed was controlled by drug kingpins who were heavily armed. If the Mexican police attempted an arrest, there would be heavy casualties. The FBI would need another plan to bring the gang leader to justice. After 4 murders in the U.S., drug dealer Gino Camacho had escaped to Mexico, out of reach of the FBI. But without his gang or the drug trade that had supported them, his money began to run out. By the spring of 1989, Kamacho was in desperate need of cash. He still had suppliers in Mexico, if he could locate a buyer in the States. Because he feared crossing back into the U.S., he searched for a middleman with narcotics distribution contacts north of the border. The low-level go-between Kamacho stumbled upon worked as an informant for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. The informant reported to his DEA handler that a man named Gino wanted to set up a drug deal. DEA agent John Lunt was based in Fort Worth, Texas. He was aware that Gino Camacho was wanted by the FBI.
What you got for me?
Suspecting that this Gino was Gino Camacho, Lunt told his informant that he wanted to go ahead with the deal. Lunt then called FBI agent Tass Bailey with good news.
John told me that it sounded like this was Gino Camacho. I then provided John with a photograph of Camacho, which he showed to his informant, and the informant confirmed that that in fact was the individual with whom he had met.
To get the fugitive across the border, the FBI offered Camacho a deal he couldn't refuse. Their informant told Camacho that an American distributor wanted to buy $1 million worth of marijuana. But the distributor needed to finalize the deal in person. He wasn't comfortable doing such a large deal with someone he'd never met. To calm Camacho's fears about entering the U.S., the informant told Camacho the distributor would advance Gino $100,000 when they met in the border town of McAllen, Texas. But there was one problem with the sting. Field agents needed a means of visually identifying the fugitive amongst other border crossers. To make Camacho stand out, the informant sent clothes he said would enable the distributor to identify him. The arrest team committed the clothing to memory: Hawaiian shirt, blue shorts, and a green-brimmed baseball cap. Kamacho got the package of clothes at a friend's apartment where he often hung out. But no one could be sure an experienced smuggler like Camacho would not be too suspicious to wear the outfit.
We knew that this was going to be our only shot at him, that once he figured he'd been set up, that the informant would be burned and he would be even more cautious than before in doing any type of transaction that would afford us an opportunity to arrest him. So we set up very elaborate arrest plans.
On the day of the deal, agents scanned the border crossing for Kamacho. They hoped they could find him in the crowd by the telltale clothes that the smuggler had been sent. Then, the arrest team spotted him in the outfit. Kamacho didn't realize the place was swarming with federal agents, dressed as patrol guards, tourists, and passers-by. They all had memorized the outfit and his picture. Calmly posing as a tourist, he started across the bridge that spanned the border. FBI agents dressed as Border Patrol guards approached Kamacho. The fugitive played it cool and gave a false name, Tomas Sanchez. When the agents asked for identification, he claimed he didn't have any. He was simply an American tourist returning from a day trip to Mexico. The agents coolly told him to come inside for questioning. He went without a fight, believing this minor misunderstanding would soon be cleared. The gang leader was already in FBI custody, and he didn't even know it. Kamacho was taken to the Border Patrol office and fingerprinted. Bailey let him stew in the cell for over 2 hours, while agents waited for a computer match on the prints. Kamacho didn't break his silence.
I addressed him as Tomas Sanchez, and he acknowledged that, and I says, well, we have taken your fingerprints, we have run them through the computer at the FBI in Washington, D.C., and the computer says that you're not Tomas Sanchez, you're in fact Gino Kamacho. And he said, well, if that's what the computer says, it must be so.
But Kamacho denied knowing anything about the murders. To the end, he never admitted any involvement in the kidnapping and murders. He claimed the FBI had framed him for the crimes. The arrest of Gino Kamacho made Page One news across the Southwest. From the border, he was moved to a cell in Dallas County and charged with firearms violations, kidnapping, conspiracy, and capital murder. Kamacho and the rest of his gang were prosecuted by the authorities. David Cook received 24 years for his part in the murders and kidnapping. Spencer Stanley got a life sentence for the 3 murders he helped carry out. Juan Jackson earned a life sentence for his involvement. Fast Eddie Cummings and Larry Merrill got 8 years each. Sam Wright had to serve his prior drug sentence, as well as additional time for fugitive flight. But for Kamacho himself, state prosecutors sought the death penalty. For the state of Texas to put a man to death, the prosecution must prove more than premeditation. It must show the accused remains a threat to society. For this reason, Kamacho was tried on the state murder charge first. Otherwise, a conviction on the federal charges would have sent Kamacho to prison, where any threat he posed to society would have been removed. In separate trials, Gino Kamacho was found guilty for murder and kidnapping. The sentence was carried out 10 years after the deaths of Andre and Evelyn Banks and Pamela Miller. On August 26, 1998, the state of Texas executed Gino Kamacho by lethal injection.